आप सभी का आज के इस पब्लिक टॉक में इस्तेमाल करता हूँ। हम सीपीएस के स्टूडेंट ने बीते दिनों संपन्न हुए कर्नाटका चुनाव पे आज का ये पब्लिक टॉक ऑर्गेनाइज किया है। जैसा कि हम जानते हैं कि किसी भी लोकतंत्र, स्वस्थ लोकतंत्र में चुनाव एक बेहद ही महत्वपूर्ण प्रक्रिया है और लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों को स्थापित करने का एक सबसे अच्छा रास्ता चुनाव ही है। बीते कुछ वर्षों में जैसा कि हमने देखा कि भाजपा ने किस तरह चुनाव को अपने अहंकार को स्थापित करने का रास्ता बना लिया है और जैसा कि हमने देखा कि कर्नाटका चुनाव में कैसे भाजपा ने सांप्रदायिक और धार्मिक उन्माद की राजनीति को बढ़ावा दिया अपने शासनकाल में और अपने शासनकाल के दौरान भाजपा ने मुस्लिम आरक्षण जो 4% ओबीसी मुस्लिम आरक्षण मिलता था उसको जो है लिंगायत और ओका लिगा समाज में ट्रांसफर करके कैसे धार्मिक तुष्टीकरण की राजनीति को वहां पे बढ़ावा दिया और रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में भी कैसे वहां के बजरंग दल जैसे संगठनों ने कैसे धार्मिक उन्माद फैलाने का काम किया। इस सब के बावजूद और जबकि हमने ये भी देखा कि पूरे चुनावी प्रचार के दौरान लोग भाजपा के पास सिर्फ एक हथियार था चुनाव लड़ने का, वो था सांप्रदायिकता। इन सब के बावजूद वहां पर एक गैर भाजपा सरकार पूर्ण बहुमत के साथ सत्ता में आती है। उस पर बात करने के लिए हमारे साथ आज स्पीकर्स मौजूद हैं। It is for all these reasons and more that Decoding Karnataka Election 2003, as today's public meeting is titled, becomes all the more important. Towards this, we have with us 4 esteemed speakers. We don't need an introduction of any these speakers as such, except one that all 4 of our speakers have been students of CPS at one point in time or the other. Or the other end are the center's brightest luminaries. Our first speaker is Professor. Our first speaker is Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy. Is an associate professor at the Center for Political Studies. He writes extensively on Indian politics. His recently released book Politics, Ethics and Emotions in India engages with Hindutva politics and presents a deeper analysis of the politics of right wing in India. He regularly writes in popular magazines and newspapers on the current political developments. We wholeheartedly welcome you, sir, in the today's public talk. Our second speaker is Dr. Amir Ali. He is an associate professor at CPS JNU. His area of expertise lies in multicultural theory, group rights, and the intellectual history of neoliberalism. Dr. Amit's latest book, Brexit and Liberal Democracy, Populism, Sovereignty and the Nation State, traces the electoral verdict favoring the right-wing populists across the world. We welcome you, sir, and looking forward to your valuable insights on the Karnataka election 2023. Our third speaker is Professor Nivedita Menon. She is the professor at Center for Comparative Politics and Political Theory, School of International Studies, JNU. Her research area includes feminist theory, political theory, and Indian politics. We welcome you, ma'am, and thank you for agreeing to this. Our last speaker, Professor Yogendra Yadav, is a full-time politician and the founder of Swaraj India. In his previous avatar, he was and in some sense still is India's foremost cephalogist. He was instrumental in establishing the subdiscipline of election studies in India as we know it today. His experience with Bharat Jodo Yatra is an important add-on in analyzing Karnataka election. We welcome you, sir, for giving us time from your busy schedules. Now I would like to invite Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy, sir, to start the public talk.
Okay, so let me begin by thanking. Huh? Am I audible? Okay. So let me begin by thanking students who keep up the spirit of JNU. Unlike against all odds, you guys are not letting up anything. There's no quietness on campus. You guys keep it busy and keep us also busy with one invite or the other. So obviously we are all very curious about Karnataka elections, and you know that election after election results only make us more confused than clear. So we are all wondering why BJP lost in Karnataka. We did not think that they would lose it so badly. So I will raise. I'm sure you guys are not interested here in. We are not astrologers. We are not going to predict what is going to happen in 2024. But we will. I will just try and open up few questions that might be relevant for us in the long term in terms of as a run up to 2024. What are the questions we might want to frame to understand this kind of a very massive oscillation that's happening in Indian politics? That the assembly elections don't seem to be any kind of a reflection for the general election at the center. So the general consensus is that BJP might have lost Karnataka, but 2024 is also a sealed case that BJP is returning with a massive majority. So that's the general sense everybody seems to have day in and day out. But more than those, that kind of a prediction that we're interested in, what is it at the heart of this business of what is happening with right-wing populism in India for the last 10 years? I think one major question that we need to raise is this oscillation between development and communal polarization. That Hindutva, the language of Hindutva, the agenda of Hindutva on the ground, I don't think means only anti-Muslim sentiment on the ground. So that I think one needs to be clear. People at large are not voting for BJP. Wherever even they are voting for BJP in big numbers, my own sense is that they are not voting for BJP only because of the anti-Muslim. That's one big thing that we all know. But there are multiple significations of Hindutva on ground. That there is the development narrative, there is an inclusive narrative, there is the welfare narrative, there is some kind of a citizenship narrative. So there is a question of fast growth, better governance, quick delivery. So there are any number of issues that one can think of which matter to people. So vote for BJP is not necessarily only a communal vote. That once we are clear on that, then I think we'll have to raise the question becomes more complex and not less complex. But Karnataka, it looked as if Karnataka was some kind of a easy choice for people to make because Karnataka, even in World Bank report, few years back, ranked number one as the most corrupt state in India. And we knew in the last 5 years that the BJP was completely failing in its governance in terms of massive that 40% corruption, local delivery mechanisms, choice of candidates, all of that. So one could argue that was this vote really against BJP's failure in terms of its governance policy? So the question, follow-up question that one can raise is assuming that this vote is against the governance failure of BJP, then what has happened to the communal polarization? Because on one hand, we almost think that there is some kind of a euphoric or a hysterical some kind of hysterical Islamophobia all over India. So if there is a Islamophobia, then one has to explain what has happened to that phobia in Karnataka, or what did happen to that phobia in Delhi election. That both elections, you remember that Mr. Amit Shah here said that इतना जोर से दबाइए बटन कि वहाँ शाहीन बाग में अर्थक्वेक आ जाए और यहाँ पे हमारा प्राइम मिनिस्टर आके बोले जोर से बजरंग बली बोल के दबाइए और वोट डालिए दोनों काम नहीं किया neither earthquake work not bajrang bali work. What does this signify? That, this oscillation that seems to be working in Indian politics, that people somewhere are voting so consciously in terms of certain kind of a religiosity that they are wearing, that garv se karo Hindu hai, religious identity on their sleeve. And there are times which it looks like that identity, that religiosity seems to be completely irrelevant. I think. That people don't simply respond. If you remember Delhi of all elections, I mean, they went 3 steps ahead. They said that if BJP is voted out of power, then Hindu women will be raped. They said that Muslims will take over. It was almost like a Muslim takeover of the Delhi will happen. So, but you see that Hindus are suddenly they become confident. Suddenly you feel that they become diffident. Suddenly they suffer from inferiority. Suddenly they become self-confident. So I don't think any of us have a very clear explanation as to what can possibly explain this oscillation between a very conscious, reflective vote of based on governance, which is what we think election should be about. And then there are occasions where even massive failure, like in Uttar Pradesh or Gujarat, both one is an industrialized state, one is a Bimaru state. That in Uttar Pradesh, a large number of migrants return back to UP. You know the kinds of death that happened during COVID. You know the health, primary health conditions in Uttar Pradesh. In spite of that, people go and vote for BJP in very big number. Similarly, in Gujarat, we saw that last 10 years record on Human Development Index. Gujarat is ranking in the top 5 states in India in spite of being the most industrialized state. So this is one big question all of us need to make sense of, that what can possibly explain this oscillation? And is there a southern exceptionalism? That's the second question most of us keep asking. That that when people are now happy that BJP South has become, India did not become Congress Mukt, but South has become BJP Mukt region. So many of us from South are reasonably happy about this. But what about North? That why is that North not able to capture? Is there really a southern exceptionalism to certain features that I think are relevant, which we might want to keep in mind, is in terms of this social and the political. That South went through huge historically social reform movements, whether it's Narayan Guru in Kerala, Basava in Karnataka, or Vemana in Telangana. Somewhere it's in the popular consciousness that there was a caste-based kind of a reform that happened. Some egalitarian notion in popular consciousness is part of the southern ethic, which is not to say that it is not communal or it is not patriarchal or it is not misogynist or it is not no, casteist. None of that. There is no clean sheet, but there is a certain social reform movement, and it's very interesting to see the anti-caste politics while in South have mostly social and cultural agenda, which they are functioning, they are not politically successful. In North, if you take Uttar Pradesh, as example of BSP, you have the political version of the anti-caste movement without a social reform agenda. So where they are carrying a political battle, social agenda is failing. Where they are carrying a social reform, no BSP is struggling to even open their account in Telangana, for instance. So what explains, and I feel this is a very key feature to understand Indian politics as to this transfer between the social and the political at an all India level. I think a lot of BJP RSS politics is trying to bridge this gap between the social and the political. It often happens that where social movements are powerful, there is some political reflection, but does it translate into a political vote? This is the question that one needs to ask. Why is that social activists who are otherwise powerful, popular, clean, do not make a dent in terms of their political? So if you look at the farmers movement in North, it made a huge impact on all of us, even in Uttar Pradesh. But when they went back to the electoral campaign, we were told that farmers movement had very little impact in terms of its electoral. Look at the social activists like Irom Sharmila. She was on fast for 15, 20 years. And when she fought election, some of you would be shocked to know that she won just about 200 votes in assembly election. Medha Patkar in Bombay, Prakash Raj in Karnataka. I can give you any number of. But why is this oscillation between the social and the political? That people somewhere think that power does not operate in the registers of this kind of a social, cultural, or even moral register. So people make a very clear distinction between the social and the political. And therefore, we'll have to fix our agenda, our lens, and frame this question in the case of Karnataka, that what is it that people have voted out? This is a question that we should. I don't think merely voting out BJP is something that we can conclude, but there is, what is it that they have really voted out? Let me give you a few examples to add to this question as to what happened in Karnataka. In this context of the social and the political is, lot of political and social mobilization happened outside the electoral domain. And this is the hidden story of Karnataka. Perhaps Yogendra, you would know about the civil social organizations that played a very pivotal role in Karnataka. But more than 100 organizations came together in Karnataka with a program called Wake Up Karnataka. They have organized. They just, some of them sent me just some data. All you might have heard of Devanur Mahadeva's book on the RSS. The Dalit question, caste question was raised. 250 workshops, 110 teams with 5,000 volunteers worked day and night in Karnataka. They conducted a survey of 41,000 families. They distributed 10 lakh copies of printed material literature against the BJP. They also say that they have convinced 49 candidates from smaller parties to withdraw from contest so that BJP does not, opposition votes do not get divided. They independently reached out with messages to Kisan, labor movement, Dalit politics, students, and others. And finally, they say that they had a presence in 31 districts and 150 taluks. Congress did not have a very strong organizational presence. It was the civil society organizations that played this hidden, somewhat hidden from media gaze role, which finally contributed to. So they think one interesting fact about Karnataka is this, that for the first time we are seeing the beginning of some kind of a transfer of the social mobilization into political outcome. Otherwise, India, since the old Gandhian legacy that we have had between the social and the political, Gandhi drew this huge, right in the nation state formation, that kind of a divide continued very deep in the Indian nation state. I think Karnataka, we could argue that is one place where are we seeing the beginnings of where social activism can begin to impact political outcomes. That can be social mobilization, can be reach out instead of like this. We mostly in JNU, you guys are the anti-example that you talk only amongst yourselves. That we talk and you listen, you ask questions, we answer. So this kind of incestuous dialogue we need to break. That I think social organizations in Karnataka broke that mold. That they went out to meet the common people, developed consciously a language where you can reach out and have a dialogue with them. So Karnataka, I think, is interesting not just because of this defeat of BJP, but I think we are witnessing some kind of a nascent beginnings of this social mobilization beginning to have some purchase for electoral outcomes. My third, in terms of 2024, that all of us know, what would this election finally mean in terms of 2024? I think it's anybody's guess. I think Yogendra will be a better person to tell us what is going to happen in 2024. But I think we need to more engage with the questions of Indian politics than simply in terms of electoral prediction. And I think some of these questions that also has to be put to the opposition parties. That what is their agenda? That today we are very clear about BJP, RSS as to what do they stand for. There is some kind of a majoritarian politics on one hand. There is a promise of development on the other hand. But I'm not really clear still that what does Congress really stand for? In one of the meetings they invited me, Congress, I told them that when Congress loses an election, they know why they lose because of corruption, infighting. But when they win election, they do not know why they won it. So I asked them when they won in Madhya Pradesh, why did you win in Madhya Pradesh? They have no clue. When they won in Rajasthan, they don't know why they win election. The opposition today in India does not know why they are winning election. They only know why they lose elections. So I think one big crisis obviously is, I think, the neoliberal crisis that opposition parties are not, in spite of what we have witnessed for last 10 years, opposition parties are still not ready to push beyond the transactional welfareism, promising bicycles, sanitary pads, and this and that have been arguing for long. One way to counter this majoritarian psyche that has developed in India is move towards a strong structural welfareism. I think opposition parties should take universal health policies, should take common neighborhood schooling, quality and free neighborhood schooling from, when Telangana movement was there, we were all part of it. We raised the slogan KG to PG free education. And I think Nyaya scheme, Congress came out with some basic income. I think these three schemes, if you can only promise something stronger, something that is structurally going to transform people's life, I think that is when people will sit up and take a notice of the opposition. The problem with much of opposition discourse is that we are critiquing BJP, RSS, and in terms of its cultural politics, but on the economic question of economic policy, it's more or less the same. That only that BJP goes little more aggressive. It for kind of violates rule of law. Its respect for human rights is very scant. Its respect for separation of powers is very scant. Other than that, I don't see that much of a difference on the economic front between regional parties and BJP. And that's why when we ask this question that has economic questions, have they become irrelevant electorally? This is a question we keep asking. That in one sense they have been made irrelevant by ruling parties. If there is no choice to make between left to BJP in terms of an economic policy, it is a foolish question to ask that whether people are voting on the economic agenda. Because if there is no difference between political parties on the question of economic policies, there is nothing to choose. And therefore, people are making sense of politics through some other lens. So that's my third point that we need to. My last point would be that we should, I think, keep the sense of politics much larger in terms of not only opposition, in terms of electoral opposition, but in terms of social protest politics itself, of religious minorities, of anti-caste movement. Is there a new promise in any of these social movements? Is there something that is very different in terms of their social agenda, in terms of the ethical quotient of this politics? Is also something we need to ask that. Are they, in one sense, an anti-majoritarian politics? That I was discussing with Amir that yesterday I saw this disturbing post on Facebook of many of our Muslim friends who are otherwise progressive, we know are take strong pro-secular position in the context of India and against Modi. We're celebrating the victory of Erdogan in Turkey. So these are, I think, the questions that we can no longer postpone. These are the questions we'll have to take head on. That if how does one make sense of this? When people say Niche, Kejriwal, Upper, Modi, we are all startled. How can this be that एक आपको जिताए 4 महीने बाद फिर मोदी को जिता दे? लोगों को क्या हो गया? लोग क्या पागल हो गए? लोग इसी पॉलिटिक्स से उभर के आ रहे हैं. लोग पागल नहीं हो रहे, पॉलिटिक्स से कुछ लग रहा पागल हो गया है. Political sensibilities जो आजकल डेवलप हो रहे हैं, there is very little choice that one can actually make. So I leave you with this fourth question: how do you make sense of? Therefore, I think that one has to also open up questions on the front of religious minorities, that that one can make this sense of that they are being marginalized, pushed to the corner. But if the choice that emerges from that kind of marginalization is celebration of Erdogan, then there is very little one can push in terms of the secular, communal, majority, minority. All this does not make any sense. But one needs to raise this much deeper conceptual question that why for certain sections of Muslims this is making sense. Why is it that many of them feel that it is okay to support Erdogan in Turkey and oppose Modi here? I think this is a large scale and this has happened to the religious. Therefore, we should keep a tab on what is happening to the religious minorities. I think the politics of the Muslim world itself has changed. I mean, you would know in 60s, 70s, you had social figures. I remember in Telangana, we had a lot of Muslim social figures. Mumbai had Hamid Dalwai. Any of us would recall Hamid Dalwai was a social reformer who claimed to be an atheist, who pitched for UCC. He was the first one to talk of caste question within Muslims. He was the first one to talk about education of Muslim women. You had such social figures among the Muslim world who raised questions within the internal world of the Muslim life world. Today, where are such figures? Today, all you are left with is Mr. Owaisi and his history sheeter brother Akbaruddin Owaisi, who is a land grabber who goes around abusing Hindu gods, and who they don't talk about social citizenship. They only talk about the religiosity. And Muslims somewhere are being, and one should understand this entire matrix is part of the majoritarian logic. But that is the part of the logic of BJP and RSS, that they are pushing these groups to a corner, then also presenting an alternative through this kind of toxic identitarian logic. And we'll have to think that how do you kind of pull what kind of questions can we frame that this is not the logic that it will work towards. I was just in Kashmir 4 months back, and I was meeting a cross section of social activists, and the general lament was there is a shift in the Kashmiri society. That from that old Kashmir, there is a new rise of Wahhabism and so on and so forth. So these are the other kinds of questions that we need to really keep a tab on. If there's no point in question in raising a moral critique of BJP and RSS without raising this very complex and difficult question. Similarly, I think we should raise question to anti-caste politics. What is happening to anti-caste politics? That we had this long tradition, whether it is Narayan Guru or Basavarna, they belong to an anti-caste tradition. Today, anti-caste politics, by and large, has got reduced to question of representation, minus any social agenda. And with that kind of a representation, I think BJP can easily accommodate. It's not a very big challenge for BJP to give representation to OBCs, lower end OBCs and Dalits. So can we afford? Well, how do you then reframe this question of justice beyond representation? How do you bring other dimensions of justice? I think is also one big question staring at us. So I'm sorry I don't have answers, but I hope that some of the questions that I framed might be useful for us to analyze the run up to 2020. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite Amir Ali, sir.
Thank you, CPS students. You're very persuasive. I didn't want to speak, but I didn't have the heart to say no to you. Okay, so what I'll do, in addition to responding to Ajay, which he doesn't want me to do, is to join certain democratic dots all across the world. In India, of course, but certainly across the world. Because we are in a very confused situation, a confused state of mind, a confused kind of politics. The Karnataka verdict was welcome. I felt personally very happy that day. I called up friends, we all congratulated each other. But what I can say is that this was significant, but it's by no means decisive in terms of the run up to 2024. I'm going to make, we're not seers of the future, not hazard. I hope I'm wrong. I just hope I'm wrong. But I do not see the BJP losing in next year's parliament. I just don't see that happening. And I think that's very sobering for us in terms of what has happened to democracy in India. I mean, how is it that the BJP has achieved this default position whereby its governance is clearly questionable? There's absolutely no delivery, but then it can go on winning elections. So I think there's something in terms of impasse that we have reached, whereby the BJP has now reached a situation where they can confidently go on winning election after election, barring the setback like Karnataka, of course, other states will lose. So that's one thing that I want to kind of make. Want to make is the point about democratic dots, which I'll come to in a while, because Ajay mentioned Turkey, and I was following the elections in Turkey very closely, and I was personally very disappointed by the Erdogan victory. Because to my mind, Erdogan's victory represents the fact that populism has not run its course. It still has some more way to go. Although we are noticing a reversal for example, in Brazil, for example, Lula's victory, Trump losing. So clearly, after all these close to a decade of the populist wave, it hasn't run its course yet. It has a little more fuel to go. And on that basis, I'm suggesting that, well, the Modi phenomenon is not over. It still has more time to go. So we have to really play a game of patience now. Okay, we have to wait this. It can't go on forever. I'm very sure of it. At some point, this has to end, as all things end. But this has been a very prolonged, protracted phase of a deeply divisive kind of politics, which is threatening to not just undo the great gains of democracy, but tear the social fabric apart, which is, of course, something we've been very concerned with. But let me come to certain aspects of Karnataka that I have been thinking about. I don't know much about Karnataka. Again, I'm always wondering why people come and ask me to speak on these things when I don't know much about them. But let me just focus on certain aspects of Karnataka which became very, became part of the news cycle in terms of the run up to the elections. One of them was the hijab issue. Now, it was deeply, deeply divisive. It began sometime last year, February 2022. Now, I'm asking you to think about the visuals. I'm no great supporter of the hijab. Firstly, I'm not. At the same time, I would oppose the way that the hijab has been banned in a country like Turkey that Ajay was talking about. But you see, when something like the headscarf is banned, it becomes a form of a rallying resistance. So remember that girl who stood up to those thugs with the headcount? I mean, I think that's in the history of this country. A visual like that will become very significant in terms of the defiance that a young girl, remember it's a young girl facing off 50 people, 50 young men, and young men in India are very intimidating. I'm sure you know about them. But think of that. Think of that visual. Think of that photograph. Think about how iconic that will become when the history of this country will be written. Okay, one girl wearing a headscarf facing off 50 thugs, saying that this is what I want to do. Similarly, if you talk about Iran, for example, we have the opposite case. We have young women saying, no, we don't want to wear it. Who is the state to tell us what to wear, what not to wear? So the point is not really about wearing a hijab or not wearing a hijab. It's about who is the state to tell us what to do and what not to do. So on that basis, the Karnataka High Court judgment was extremely unfortunate, and the stance of the BJP was quite remarkable, because we're always told that secularism is a bad idea, it's secular. But notice the irony. The irony is that from Karnataka last year, the hijab issue, the BJP has increasingly been assuming a form of laissez-faire secularism that you see in France, which is clearly anti-minority in terms of the banning of all kinds of religious symbolism. So this is clearly a contradiction in terms of the BJP's position. And I think it's important to be able to understand these discomforts that the BJP has, to be able to open that wedge in terms of undermining the kind of iron grip, vice-like grip that the BJP has been able to exercise over this country. It's clearly very perverse. As I said, it will run its course. It has to end at some time. But at the same time, many of us have to wrap our heads around this problem of why does the BJP have this kind of a purchase. Now, this brings me to a point that Suhas Palchikar was making in the Express last week. In spite of every single failure of this government, whether it is demonetization or whether it is the GST or the handling of the pandemic, the kind of slack that is, that people are willing to give Mr. Modi is unbelievable. It's incredible. I have no explanation for this. Clearly, there is something wrong in the way that there's a certain kind of a credibility that is given to his persona. Well, clearly, there are questions that are raised over his degree, over his capability of running. I mean, Nirmala Sitharaman's husband, Prabhakar Parikala. Okay, the interview that he gave to Karan Thakur, saying that his government is staggeringly incompetent. Better half is better half. So there you have it. I mean, of course, it's a confusing time to live through. Of course, it is. But let us understand that the confusing time, these confusing times cannot last forever. And at these moments, it is important to understand the confusing nature of politics. Now, let me come back to my democratic dots that I was trying to join. Now, yes, Karnataka is significant. But as I said, the big dot next year, 2024, it's not only the last one. Okay, but the big dot, in terms of what it is building up to, is not in any way going to lead to the defeat of the BJP. As I said, I hope I'm wrong. I hope we're pleasantly surprised. I don't see that happening at all. Which means that we now have to start thinking of what exactly is the kind of, as I call it, a vice-like grip that the BJP's imagination exercises over people. Now, this is where I agree with Ajay. I'm not contesting your point, Ajay, but I completely agree with you on your last points. That what is now required is a much larger, more capacious vision of politics. Specifically, did I do something wrong? Sorry about that. I didn't do anything.
हटा दो चार्ज है.
Okay. Let me come specifically to the issue of the larger capacious politics. Yes, structural welfareism, I completely agree with you. Because this is what we need. And, in terms of targeting the BJP, its great electoral success comes from this category that of the Labh Bharti that Mr. Modi has created, through the kind of minimal welfareism, that this kind of small veneer over the larger neoliberal politics that for the BJP, the aggressively neoliberal politics. So, time and time again, people write off the Congress. I mean, Congress cannot be written off. It's not going away. Okay, I mean, it's an interesting point. They never know how they do it. Fluke. Oh yeah, but keep going. So the Congress, of course, is going to be around. One thing that has really, it's yielded results to the Congress is the Bharat Jodo Yatra. It's significant. It has certainly captured the imagination of like never thought of Mr. Gandhi. Hold it from. Hello. Yeah. Okay. I've never thought of Mr. Rahul Gandhi as someone who has, who's very witty, but that one slogan, that one phrase, नफरत की बाजार में मोहब्बत. Okay. I'll stay. We're never known for our infrastructure in JNU. It's always been a problem. I don't think we'll solve it in our lifetime at least. Maybe. Let's go on. Okay, let me come back to this point because what one aspect of the okay, let's hope that this holds up. Ajay, didn't happen when you were speaking.
वहीं बैठ जाओ सुनील.
Okay. Fingers crossed. Here goes again. Um, in terms of welfareism, what we require is a much larger, capacious understanding of structural welfareism, as Jay was pointing out. Now, what I'm trying to do right now is to juxtapose this with that. Okay, so let's try again. Yeah, over there. Just hand it over here. Careful, careful.
ऑफ करके
Okay. Now we know.
हो गया. ऑन
Okay.
ऑन करो. नहीं ऑफ है. हाँ आप ठीक.
Okay. Let's start again. Okay. Let me come back to this point. This, what are we trying to do with all of this is to focus on what Ajay called a larger, capacious structural welfareism. Posit that against the BJP's minimalist Labharti. Making the Labharti as kind of this wretched recipient of welfare. This is what really is perhaps the way ahead. Because what opposition parties really need to be doing is not just the negative anti-BJP thing that it's been all about in the last 20 years, but to talk about a positive kind of a political agenda. Now, part of that positive agenda is to counter the narrative of neoliberalism. Now, for this, the Congress will require a lot of Okay. I'm trying not to come to the end of my presentation, but what I'm trying to say is the fact that the BJP, so not the BJP, it's kind of the Congress, some kind of a bipolarity. And that bipolarity is in terms of, remember the NAC, the National Privacy Council, and its great reform agendas like, for example, the Right to Information, the Food Security Act, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and then on the other hand, you have the neoliberal wing of Congress. Okay, to Montex and Ahluwalia inspired. Now, I think this is what facilitates the rise of the BJP. Those 10 years of the Congress were significant. They won government, they could government. So the landmark legislation that was called for the RTI, for example, the Food Security Act, but what the Congress needs to realize is, suppose it comes back to power. Suppose, hypothetically. If it continues in the way that it has been continuing, it just means another round of legislation coming up. To counter the BJP, you cannot just keep talking about secularism, majoritarianism, minoritarianism. You can't just keep doing that. One thing you have to do is to talk about a positive, socially transformative agenda whereby the people of this country can be brought together across and transcending their narrow identities. So although I have worked a lot on multiculturalism, making the case for a larger identity politics, transcending identity politics. It's done its thing. But now what we need is a much larger structural focus on the very end of neoliberalism. Now one can see that coming. Look at countries like in America, for example, like all began. Look at the government like Gudavarthy, that is unsuccessful in terms of implementing a socially transformative policy. Okay, so this unfortunately this time has elected a majority of right-wing members of the. So once again, my point basically remains the point that Ajay said. But what we are looking at now is that in order to counter the divisiveness, the hate, the venom of the BJP, it is not just enough.
There is something wrong with you.
Okay, let me get back to this. Once again, the point is, of course, the BJP is divided. Of course, the BJP carries forward campaigns to hate. But it's not just enough to talk about the hate of the BJP. To transcend that kind of hate, it is important to bring in this kind of a positive socio-economic agenda whereby people of this country, especially the marginalized, are brought together. Now, let me come to this question. The BJP's agenda is, of course, to be divisive. We don't spend much time on that. I have been arguing with a lot of my friends, I just think that my relative over the years. Now, of course, the thing to note about Erdogan was he's been in power for over 2 decades now. He was forced into a runoff, remember. He couldn't win outright in the first round, 49.5%. Which means, as I keep saying, that this whole populist right-wing agenda is, to my mind, now running out of steam. This is the moment to realize that, okay, we have more time to go. But in order to see it out completely, it is important to kind of think about a politics, which is very, very good. I often use a phrase in class, a lot of my students say, I'm very interested in whenever I say this, I talk about the idea of the possibilities. There are immense possibilities. Those immense possibilities are there in terms of envisioning how we can all live together collectively. And we can live collectively together. One last point about it, because I did really want to say this one. The BJP will throw everything at the election. Okay, you know that old saying that throw the kitchen sink as well. Every single thing. हर मुमकिन कोशिश करने की कोशिश. The simple reason that the BJP cannot bear to be the opposition. Its appetite for power is insatiable. It does not have what is referred to as institutional forbearance, which is very healthy for any political party. Political party must sit down in the opposition, provided that's something we just not understand. Okay, as I said, I don't see that happening. What I do see is a decade. We still have 7 years. A decade in which population itself will most clearly be running out of fuel. When that happens, we have to stock ourselves up with a certain kind of imagination on how we will grasp country. That not the whole world. That we can increase our
नहीं होगा बारिश हवा चल टेक्नोलॉजी का भी साथ लोग एक सॉकेट भी लगा सकता है प्लग लगा देगा
Hello. Okay. Now I'd like to invite Nivedita Menon to speak.
So first of all, congratulations on occupying the space outside SSS II, which is apparently now a formal venue. Congratulations and thank you for organizing it, and thank you to the students of CPS for doing this. I took the title of the event seriously, that is Decoding Karnataka Elections, in order to think about a code which we have to actually reconstruct and understand. Because I assume, I think correctly, that Yogen will be actually able to give us, uh, he's the person with the expertise to talk about the elections. I also completely agree with Ajay and Amir that we have to go past the kind of agenda the BJP has set and have a social agenda. We have to fight the NEP. These policies have to be rolled back. I agree with all of that. But what I am going to talk about today is about the way in which uh, whatever we might say about the different issues and the report cards that the civil society organizations made and so on, the the ghost or the specter that actually haunted the Karnataka elections was very much Hindu Muslim, Hindu Muslim. It was very much that. So I want to talk about, and this is, I'm saying Hindu Muslim almost in quotes, because this is how people talk about it when you see them on videos and so on. कि बहुत हुआ Hindu Muslim, बहुत हुआ Hindu Muslim, Hindu Muslim. Uh, so what I'm doing is I'm stepping aside while agreeing completely with both the previous speakers. I'm stepping aside to talk about. So I'm going to make three points. Uh, one of which will be, they appear to be at cross purposes with the kind of argument Ajay made, but we'll come to that. So one is that I feel that Karnataka highlights the way, it's not the first time it happened in India, but it highlights the way in which the stigmatized Muslim body became one that represents defiance. And one that represents defiance not just of Hindu Rashtra, but of authoritarianism and of it became representative of the reclamation of democracy. So Karnataka, the image of the image before the image that Amit talked about, which was also an iconic image, was the image that we saw of hijab-clad young women locked out of educational institutions, barred by iron gates from the resources of the nation, barred from from education, and basically locked out. And these images were dense with implied violence because any moment we could imagine, and we know how this has happened, the coercive apparatus of the state could be let loose on them. So there was a kind of implied violence in these images of security guards on one side and young hijab-clad women on the other. Um, and there was this kind of the exiled Muslim body uh, outside the resources of the nation. Now, we know, of course, that it's not only ideological violence. We know what these terms mean. We know about the violence of terms like Gohatya and Love Jihad and Kapdon se pehchane jayenge. So we know that these are not just words. They are perlocutionary utterances, to use the term that Jane Austen made famous, which is basically that you're performing something by uttering that phrase, and that performance, the performance of violence. So we know that. But this stigmatized body was, in fact, the defiant image that haunted the Karnataka elections. And the image, if we had to choose one image of the Karnataka elections, for me, it would be that young woman shouting back, and she shouted back a religious slogan. She shouted back, Allahu Akbar, to the men, to the goons, to the absolute, the potentially violent men who were shouting Jai Shri Ram, which, as we know, has ceased to be a religious utterance. It has ceased to be a peaceful Ram Ram Bhai greeting. It has become a militarized weapon with which to attack all non-Hindus, but also Hindus who refuse to conform. And she walked through that intimidating formation to do what? She was going to submit an assignment. How banal is that act for a young person? Walking in to submit an assignment in time, And that became this heroic act. And as a visibility rights activist said when she was told, "You're so brave, you're so heroic," and she said, "I wish I didn't have to be heroic. I wish visibility was treated was that I wish society was such that visibility was not something to be heroic about." So this woman became an unintended hero. This regime has made many unintended heroes of many of us. And then we know about the other young woman who topped the humanities stream after being forced to attend classes without her hijab. It was extremely traumatic for her because it was something she believed in. She had worn hijab since a very young age, but her parents convinced her that it's worth that don't fall into this trap. Don't stop going to classes because they are, of course, they say you can only attend class in hijab. She took off her hijab, she wrote the exam, she topped the humanities stream, and she's going to attend university in a hijab, right? So there is a way in which this hijab-clad defiant figure. So there's a way in which the Muslim woman has emerged as a defiant figure from anti-CAA protests onwards. There is and the idea that the wearing the hijab somehow makes you docile and it's a symbol of patriarchy is something that has been, I think, completely broken by the protests that we have seen in this country. And in Karnataka, I think it reached a certain apogee. Now, the second point I want to make, which is where I might sound as if I'm at, I mean, I was thinking when Ajay was ending his talk and he was talking about the need to address the ways in which Muslim people who were Muslim, I was about to say right wing, but what he's saying is that even people who are not Muslim right wing are supporting Erdogan and so on. And he was talking about Owaisi and so on. And I feel that there's a way in which accepting this can sometimes, and it may not happen with Ajay's argument, but there is a way in which a left politics prohibits the carrying of religious identities into the political domain. And I think we need to think about this very seriously. So that is, we need to radically rethink a mantra or a slogan or a belief that we have held. Leave your identities behind when you enter the realm of secular class politics. Because the attack of Hindutva is directly against non-Hindus, but especially against Muslims. And when that happens, Muslims will speak up as Muslims, whether they are born Muslim, whether they are Muslim by belief, whether they are practicing atheists, but they are Muslim if their name is Muslim. I will never forget the day that our old friend Javed Alam, soon after 92, when Babri Masjid was demolished, had to, a very well-known social scientist, someone who may be reading his work, a very, very old and good friend who passed away some years ago. He was going to travel by train and family was trying to persuade him not to travel under his own name because that was what the situation was. And he said, but I'm not a Muslim. So Javed Alam cannot say I'm not a Muslim, that he's a communist. He was a communist. Javed Alam is a Muslim for him. So when that happens, they will speak up as Muslims and as well as citizens, and to insist that they leave their Muslim identities behind. And this has been said by many people. It has been said by parties. It has been said by left parties. It has been said by people in the public domain that don't raise such slogans in the CAA protests, which are divisive. So the divisive slogan is a religious Muslim slogan. And to say that you must leave your identities behind is actually expressive of a kind of unthinking patriarchy, caste privilege, and Savarna Hindu domination. Because if religious identities are prohibited from entering the political domain, that will exclude only minorities. Because we know that Savarna Hinduism is normalized in the public domain, just as Christianity is normalized in Europe and the USA. So this idea that, so we have to rethink what we are calling secularism. Secularism often acts as a kind of, the term secularism often acts like a kind of a magic trick. It draws your attention away from issues like capitalism, caste, and focuses you on something called religion, and often that's on the bodies of women. And we need to to get away from this magic trick that secularism performs in order to look at issues, other issues, which become visible once you step outside the grid of secularism. And one of them is this. I did mention capitalism and so on. I won't go into that. But one of them is this, that there is uh, 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 that we have to, and when I say we, I mean left secular politics has and feminist politics has to become comfortable with the fact that multiple religious identities will be present in our spaces, and that we should learn from one another, and that we may not agree on everything, but we may agree on one thing, and let's work on that one thing together, because this is another thing that we have all had, we should learn, working with a common minimum agenda rather than a maximalist program, because there cannot be agreement on a maximalist program. A common minimum agenda is what we can work on. The third point I want to make has to do with, this is my third and final point, has to do with the way in which we have used the term Hindu without thought, really, for a very long time. And I think it's important to remember, as we learned from Baba Sahib Ambedkar, that there is no such thing as Hindu. We need to start stating very clearly, and we need to recognize that India is a country of minorities. What is called Hinduism today, or what Hindutva promotes, Hindutva is essentially Brahmanism. And Brahmanism is a minority practice like multiple minority practices in India. And to go to Karnataka, because each of these examples, each of the points I'm making is being sparked by the Karnataka elections. Take the Lingayats of Karnataka. We know that, I mean, there are election analyses about who voted where, and Yogen is really much better equipped to talk about that. But I also feel that there is a way in which the media reads elections purely in terms of who got a seat and who didn't get a seat, and which you removed Yadurappa, so you lost the Lingayat votes and so on. I think there's a way in which at least many of us need to raise the larger issue that the Lingayats are not Hindus. They claim not to be Hindus. They left Hinduism in the 12th century because they rejected the Vedas, the caste system, and Brahminical superiority. Since the time of the constitution, the Lingayats have been claiming a separate religious identity, but they've not been permitted to have this. Even at the time that the constitution was being drafted, they demanded a separate identity. They were not granted it. Let us not forget that Gauri Lankesh and Kalabulgi were both assassinated. They were both extremely anti-Hindutva. They were brave anti-Hindutva crusaders, but they were Lingayats, and they wrote and spoke as Lingayats. Lingayats and Veerashaivas, which claim to be a subsect of Lingayats, claimed minority status, and in 2018 they were granted minority status by the Congress government in Karnataka. And the opposition BJP termed this decision as an attempt to divide the Hindus. And later, at the center, it was rejected. The central government rejected the recommendation of the state government to grant religious minority status, and reiterated this. The state center, the Modi government reiterated, these communities are part of the Hindu religion and do not form another religion of their own. When Lingayats claim minority status, they are accused of dividing Hindus. So there's a conundrum here. If Lingayats are already Hindus, then Hindus are dividing Hindus. Why is the claim of Lingayats to be Hindu not acceptable? To whom is it not acceptable? Because those who actually, for legal reasons, census reasons, and reasons of state, being positioned under the umbrella term Hindu, they're only concerned with their own practices. They don't care who else is or is not Hindu. Who cares? Hindutva cares. Because Hindutva is the modern politics where numbers matter. And there has been a complete normalization of the idea that Hindus as a community have existed since time immemorial. But in fact, what we see is a process by which, from the Puranas onwards, there has been a project of attempting to create Hindus, and it has been a failed project. Because community after community either, well, of course, it's also successful, which is not to say that there are many groups and communities which long to be Brahmin and which want to be accepted into the Hindu fold. But there are multiple communities. The Ramakrishna Mission wanted to be called a minority. They were not permitted. Lingayats wanted to be. Sikhs want to be continuously saying we are not Hindus because, as you know, the definition of Hindu is simply all those who are not Parsi, Muslim, Christian. Because you cannot come up with a single uh, 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 principle which will unite all people called Hindu. So Hindutva ideology is essentially Brahmanism. It's North Indian Brahmanism. It's Savarna. It's masculinist. Um, there are different strands of Hindutva ideology. Savarkar, who represents a modernist strand, was sharply critical of caste, did not promote vegetarianism. He said some very interesting things about rearing of cows, and he had some very interesting things to say about that. And he expressed modernist distaste at orthodox Hindu beliefs. But the form that Hindutva has taken today in the 21st century is not Savarkarite. Although he is genuflexive too as the originator of Hindutva. And in fact, 21st century Hindutva does not even recognize the significance of their own founding father, Savarkar's strategy of offering Hinduism even to those who did not accept Vedas and Brahmanism. Instead, as we know, violence is freely used against those who do not comply with Sanatani norms. The only identifiable community with specific beliefs and practices that can be termed Hindu is Brahmanism. And this myth is sustained by the legal definition that I just talked about. And that, if anybody had any doubts at all until now, that Hindutva, so the difference between Hindutva and Hinduism is not Hindutva is political and Hinduism is a large, beautiful, heterogeneous religion which accommodates everybody. Hindutva is Brahmanism, and what is called Hinduism is Brahmanism too. And if we had any doubts about it, that the other iconic image will always be the inauguration of the building that they call the parliament today. Exclusively Brahmin except for the Prime Minister, and exclusively male except for the Brahmin Finance Minister. If we have any doubts about what was going on. So what we learned from the Karnataka elections is that democracy is locally inflected and permanently heterogeneous. The massive civil society mobilization in Karnataka was directed towards an election, but could not have happened if they started mobilizing from the election time onwards. In fact, as I think all of us know, Ajay did talk about the number of meetings that were held, etc. But these were all long-standing movements in the area that came together, and democracy. We have come to think of democracy as a particular electoral procedure by which a government is put in place in a nation state. But this is only a recent phenomenon in human history. We should remember that democracy refers to something more fundamental, to the ways in which people seek autonomy to shape their lives and worlds, whether as individuals or as communities. And I think it's important to remember this because otherwise there's a danger that while analyzing election victories, there's a danger that we restrict the idea of democracy to election victories. And whether or not the BJP wins in 2024, what awaits you is the production of more and more spaces like this, and the protection of more and more spaces like this, and the expansion of more and more spaces like this, whoever the hell is in power.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Let me begin by saying why I actually accepted the invitation. When I read the list of speakers, I said to your friend, मेरे पास बोलने को बचेगा क्या? कि सब लोग अच्छी बड़ी और सुंदर बातें कह देंगे, उसके बाद मेरे को क्या कहने को है? मैंने कहा कहाँ हो रहा है? उन्होंने कहा नहीं सेमिनार हॉल में नहीं, बाहर हो रहा है। मैंने कहा बाहर क्यों हो रहा है? कहते इसकी परमिशन नहीं मिलती है। तो फिर मेरे कान खड़े हुए। मैंने कहा नहीं, ये तो अच्छा मामला लग रहा है। परमिशन नहीं मिल रही है, फिर आप बाहर कर रहे हैं। That, as Nivedita said, this truly affirms the tradition that this university has had, and I'm here basically to say thank you, to celebrate. I was just checking with Nivedita.
because we are not just from CPS, we are actually batchmates. We are MA batchmates. And when the campus shifted, in those good golden days, JNU used to be in that old campus, which is now called what?
Old camp.
Old campus, abhi bhi hai. So we in 1982 we shifted to this building. So we did first year of our MA in old campus and second year of our MA in SSS, which is now called SSS I. So very happy to be back here. And now that you've been officially told that I'm a full-time political worker, that relieves me of any responsibility of saying anything intelligent, anything deep or anything theoretical. In any case, my interest in Karnataka election primarily stems from the fact that I was there. I spent about 2 months in Karnataka doing what Ajay spoke about. There was a civil society initiative, civil society kuch naam sa ban gaya hai, but people's movements of various kinds came together under a label Yeddilu Karnataka, which is to say Awake Karnataka. So I spent 2 months working in the background because obviously I don't speak the language. So I spent 2 months eating some good South Indian food and learning more about the state and learning something about the election. So I thought I'd share some of those things with you. I have 4 points to make. One is about what is it that was at stake in the Karnataka election. Second, about why did we have the kind of result that we had. Third, what are the consequences of the result? And fourth, what are the lessons that we can learn? अभी भी वो मास्टर वाला अंदाज गया नहीं है, क्या करूं? 4 points, blackboard पे लिख के 1, 2, 3, 4. What was at stake? Karnataka election was not an ordinary election. It was not an election merely to elect who would be kaun banega Mukhyamantri for next 5 years in Karnataka. At stake was something much bigger. Because we are going through a phase in our history where our republic is being dismantled. Not merely democracy, not merely liberal democracy, not just constitution, not just some protocols, not just secularism. All of this put together and more. Our republic itself. Why do I use the word republic to capture it all? We can have some discussion at some stage. But basically, a shared political community that comes together to abide by certain political frame with some shared values. The entire edifice is right now under challenge. Karnataka was a very critical, could have been a very critical turning point. आजकल होता है ना सड़क पे कि आप गाड़ी चला रहे हैं और अचानक आप थोड़ा सा गलत लेन में आ जाते हैं. वो गलत लेन आपको फ्लाईओवर पे ले जाती है और फिर बताते हैं अगले 15 किलोमीटर तक यू टर्न नहीं है. This is what Karnataka election was. This was entering a lane which would take you to a flyover, after which for 20 years there was no U-turn. In that sense, I think I am not quite sure that populism would run its own course and we will be back to better times. Because that presupposes continuity of normal politics. Normal politics so to jarur hoga, populism will run its course. Of course, people will get tired and sick and tired of this nonsense. But by the time they get sick and tired of this nonsense, will they have the elementary structures left which they can use to throw them out. No. That is what is happening. पहले आप मीटिंग सेमिनार हॉल में करते थे, आज आप यहां कर रहे हैं. आज से 5 साल बाद आपको किसी अंडरग्राउंड बेसमेंट में करनी पड़ेगी. This is the difference. So what is at stake here is the very survival of the basic constitutional structures, what we call the Republic of India. And we don't have a very long time to defend it. Karnataka, if the BJP had won Karnataka, आपने देखा त्रिपुरा पे कितना डंका बजाया था. अगर कर्नाटका जीत लेते, that would have been her TV channel पे चलता 2024 is a done deal. Now let's talk about 29. ये पहले हो चुका है, आज की मैं बात नहीं कह रहा, ये 6 महीने पहले हो रहा था. यूपी इलेक्शन के बाद शुरू हो गया था ये सब. और फिर होता कि भारत जोड़ो यात्रा तो खुश हो गई, पंचर हो गया, और ये तो पप्पू रह गया, और अब तो बस मोदी ही आएगा. तो उसके बाद चेंज करना बेहद मुश्किल हो जाता. Karnataka election could have shut the doors for 2024. That's why people like me who had no special expertise, मेरे कहने से 2 लोग वोट थोड़ी बदलेंगे कर्नाटका. But we thought that everyone has to put every ounce of it to make sure that at least the door remains open. That was that is what was at stake in Karnataka. I said in Hindi, ये भारत के स्वधर्म की रक्षा का कुरुक्षेत्र है इसमें. That this was a battle to defend the soul of India, the idea of India. But a battle which is fought for such high stakes is actually not fought on the ground with those principles. 1857 was first battle of India's independence. And any historian could easily demonstrate that those who were fighting were not fighting for anything like India's independence. They had all kinds of other motives. हमेशा हिस्ट्री में हर कोई चीज जिसको पुरानी अल्थुजेरियन लैंग्वेज में कहते थे ना, ओवर डिटर्मिन्ड, ये प्रोफेसरों के रहने से आदत खराब हो जाती है, कुछ कुछ पुराने शब्द याद आ जाते हैं. ये ओवर डिटर्मिन्ड सा रहता है मामला. So this a battle for something big is not necessarily played out on the ground for those, by the actors, for those principles. BJP was indeed fighting to retain the dominance of politics of hatred. But its own candidates, many of them were trying to convince local Muslims कि देखो हमारी पार्टी करती होगी, मैं तो आपके लिए काम करता हूं ना. All this was happening on the ground. So this battle on the ground was being fought through multiple things. There was a question of sheer incumbency. सरकार अच्छी चलाई नहीं चलाई, 40% भ्रष्टाचार सरकारा, which was a very dominant theme in this election. Nothing to do with those larger principles that we are talking about. There was also the issue of, what specific MLAs would do. There was the question of caste and community. Very careful logic. ये सब बीजेपी बाहर आके तो बोलती है कि बाकी सब कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स करते हैं. मैंने देखा है जब बीजेपी जीत जाती है उसके बाद कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स का एनालिसिस नहीं होता. जब बीजेपी हार जाती है तो कहा जाता है कि कास्ट पॉलिटिक्स की वजह से सब हो गया. BJP employs a very intricate caste equation on the ground. तो वो भी था. So all this was being played out. To be very honest, my question is not why did Congress win this election? My real question is why did Congress not win it much bigger? Honestly, when the election began, for all these local reasons, the election was loaded so much against the BJP. I mean, in a state where people routinely change governments after every 5 years, in that state where the BJP had run such an incompetent and corrupt government, करप्शन का हालत ये था कि सरकारी ठेकेदार प्रधानमंत्री को चिट्ठी लिख रहे थे कि बड़ा करप्शन हो गया। कभी सरकारी ठेकेदार को लिखते सुना है आपने? गवर्नमेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स, मतलब द एपिटमी ऑफ करप्शन जो होता है, वो बेचारे कह रहे थे कि नहीं ये तो बहुत ज्यादा हो गया। और ये मठ वाले कितना अच्छा, मतलब कि धार्मिक पार्टी है ना, तो बाकी सबसे 40% लेते थे, मठ वालों को 10% ऑफ दिया था, कहा था आपसे 30% लेंगे, लेकिन 30% तो आपसे भी लेंगे। All this is on paper, on record. Protest. So, in a state where anti-incumbency is the norm, where BJP was running such an incompetent and corrupt government, where BJP was a divided house and for a change, Congress was united. I mean, ये भी आपने सुना है कभी कि Congress is more united than the BJP? My question is, in that state, why did Congress not win 180 seats? अगर बीजेपी होती, मैं आपको सच बताता हूं, अगर बीजेपी को ये 3 एडवांटेज होते और उसके बाद कांग्रेस ने वो जो 5 गारंटीज दी, यू नो, आफ्टर ए लॉन्ग टाइम आई थिंक कांग्रेस अंडरस्टूड हु इट्स वोटर्स वर एंड दे अलाइन्ड देयर इलेक्टोरल कैंपेन टू हु देयर रियल वोटर्स वर, पुअर, विमेन, रूरल, फार्मर्स, उनके साथ किया। तो ये सब होने के बाद अगर बीजेपी को ये 4 एडवांटेज होते, BJP would have won 180 out of 224. And the reason Congress could not win that, so मेरे लिए सवाल actually ये है कि why did Congress not do that well? And the answer is the sheer election machine. The difficulty is that we don't sufficiently discuss these issues. ये बिल्कुल वैसा ही, आप में से जरूर कुछ यूपीएससी एस्पिरेंट्स जरूर होंगे ना, तो नहीं होंगे, तो इंटेलेक्ट होना और एग्जाम में अच्छे नंबर आना तो थोड़ी सी अलग अलग चीजें होती। मैं नहीं कह रहा कि जिनके अच्छे नंबर आते हैं वो इंटेलेक्चुअल नहीं होते, लेकिन दो अलग चीजें हैं। इसी तरह से जनता के बीच में अच्छा काम करना और इलेक्शन जीतना दो बिल्कुल अलग चीज है। दिस होल मैकेनिक्स ऑफ, जैसे एग्जाम्स में अच्छे नंबर लेने के मैकेनिक्स होते हैं ना, ये 1.5 मार्क का क्वेश्चन आएगा, फला यूनिट से आएगा, इसके अनसॉल्व पेपर ये कर लो, ये सब चीजें होती हैं। सो व्हाट यू नो, सो मैं कहता हूं जैसे जिस जमाने में निवेदिता और मैं स्टूडेंट थे, उस जमाने में हमारे लिए था कि टेक्स्ट बुक पढ़ ली, एग्जाम देने चले गए, अच्छे मार्क्स आ गए। आजकल क्या होता है, कोटा में आप जाते हैं, कोटा में कोचिंग लेते हैं, है ना, और उसके बाद आप आते हैं। सो कांग्रेस, मतलब बीजेपी और बाकी सब पार्टियों के इलेक्शन लड़ने में उतना ही डिफरेंस है जितना कि कोटा की कोचिंग में और पुराने स्टाइल के एग्जाम देने में फर्क है। सो बीजेपी ऑलवेज हैज दैट एडवांटेज, where they should lose massively, they lose only mildly. Where they should lose marginally, they actually win. So something of that kind happened in Karnataka. But to my mind, the things that actually played out, in fact, the most interesting thing was the issue of the entire issue of secularism, of Hindu-Muslim issue, of the onslaught on the Muslims. That was a non-issue in the election. Non-issue does not mean that it did not influence people. At least it was not spoken about. Muslims decided not to foreground this issue in public conversations because they thought the consequences would be great. Chup rahe to zyada acha. And Hindus decided to, because they were so sick and tired of the misgovernance, they decided to not foreground it. उसकी वजह से नॉर्मल चीजें आई ऊपर, और नॉर्मल चीजों के ऊपर आते ही, because the whole thing was loaded so much against the BJP, almost everything in that should matter in routine electoral politics was loaded against the BJP, and then what are the consequences? मैं बार बार ये बात कहता हूं, इलेक्शंस में the intentions that go into the making of an election outcome and the consequences can be entirely different. तो जो हुआ वो मैंने आपको बताया किस वजह से हुआ, इसके बारे में कई सवाल हो सकते हैं, वी कैन डिस्कस दैट, मेरे पास कुछ डेटा वगैरह भी पड़ा है, वी कैन टॉक अबाउट इट। द कंसीक्वेंसेस आर एक्चुअली फार रीचिंग, और यही होता है, बिल्कुल एक मंडेन सा गेम होता है, बहुत ही कोटिडियन चीजों से खेला जाता है, और उसके कंसीक्वेंसेस इतने फार रीचिंग होते हैं that we have therefore a temptation of reading the consequences back into intentions. मगर वो एक्चुअली होता नहीं। The consequences are, उस दिन रात को हम बैठे जब इलेक्शन आउटकम हुआ, रिजल्ट आया, तो मैंने किसी दोस्त से पूछा कि कैसा महसूस हो रहा है, उसने कहा हवा में ऑक्सीजन ज्यादा महसूस हो रहा है। I think that sort of summed it up, कि हवा में ऑक्सीजन ज्यादा महसूस हो रही है, सडनली ऐसा लगा कि हाँ कुछ है, मगर ये टेम्परेरी भी हो सकता है, जरूरी नहीं कि बहुत वक्त चले। What it did was, Karnataka election outcome ensured that 2024 remains an open game. And that's a very big achievement. It does not ensure that BJP will lose in 24, of course not. But it keeps the game open. It was a very major setback to politics of hatred. It meant so much to, generally I would say minorities, but specifically Muslims, जो निवेदिता बात करनी थी जिस इमेज की, ऐसे न जाने कितनी लड़कियां, कितने लोग उस इलेक्शन के दिन देख रहे थे क्या होगा क्या होगा क्या होगा, और इस आउटकम ने एकदम उस तरह की पॉलिटिक्स को कुछ टाइम के लिए सबड्यू कर दिया। इसको ओवररेट नहीं करना चाहिए, तो मैंने लिखा भी इसके बारे में, मैंने कहा कि नफरत हारी है लेकिन अभी मोहब्बत की जीत नहीं है। So the consequence of that is that politics of bigotry, hatred has been defeated. It does not mean, कई बार हम बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग उसके रीडिंग्स करते हैं, कई अखबार वगैरह के अंदर मैंने देखा कि सेकुलरिज्म की ट्रायम्फ हुई है, एक मायने में हुई है क्योंकि उसके कंसिक्वेंसेस जो हैं सेकुलर पॉलिटिक्स को मजबूत करने वाले, लेकिन उसके इंटेंशंस में ऐसा सोचना कि कर्नाटका का वोटर बहुत इतने सालों की जो नफरत वहां इंजेक्ट की गई है उसको अचानक खत्म करके कर्नाटका में सेकुलरिज्म आ गया है, वैसा कुछ हुआ नहीं। बस उन्होंने उसको फोरग्राउंड नहीं किया कि चलो इस बार ये नहीं, और मुझे इसलिए महसूस होता है कि वो साउथ इंडिया एक्सेप्शनलिज्म वाली बात शायद सही नहीं है, because at least Karnataka is not a very good example for South Indian exceptionalism. I think to my mind Kerala and Tamil Nadu would be very strong cases for that. Karnataka for some time has looked like one state from South India which resembles North India in some ways, and the hatred, prejudices that have been injected were deep, continue to be there. And the battle against that would be a very, very long battle. लेकिन फिलहाल उसको एक ब्रेक मिली है, और अगर आप सेकुलरिज्म को बचाने की लड़ाई लड़ना चाहते हैं तो आपको एक फुटहोल्ड मिल गया है उसके। That's all that has happened. लेसन्स क्या है इसके? पहला लेसन ये है, जो दो चार बार हो भी चुका था, this whole thing about invincibility of Mr. Modi is a myth, is sham. एक बार नहीं कितनी बार हो चुका है, लेकिन कुछ ऐसी मिथ है हर 4 महीने में दोबारा रिसरेक्ट किया जाता है। दिल्ली में हारे, वेस्ट बंगाल में हारे, ये तो बड़े इलेक्शन थे जहां बीजेपी ने बहुत सीरियसली इन्वेस्ट किया था, रूटीन बाकी सब जगह जो हुआ वो अलग है। These were elections where BJP and Mr. Modi very seriously invested a lot, and then they lost. And how? 2, it demonstrates that politics of hatred can be defeated. That even if you have serious communalization of society, it is not necessary that the communal question will trump everything else. It can be sidelined. और मेरे ख्याल से कांग्रेस ने कर्नाटका में यही किया था. What Karnataka Congress did in Karnataka was to very carefully sidestep the Hindu-Muslim question. वो एक जो मैनिफेस्टो में आ गया था वो भी एक अलग तरह का मामला था जिसको बहुत लोगों ने मिसरीड कर दिया. But Congress basically sidestepped it and focused on the governance and economic issues. To my mind, that's not a bad template to begin with. 2024 के लिए second lesson ये है that if you actually keep your focus entirely on issues of governance and issues of economy, you have much greater purchase than other issues. Someone might say, but why are you skirting the real issues? Why are you taking this shortcut? Is that not timid? Is that less than principled? I would agree, and I would say, unfortunately, we have not created enough base for ourselves to be able to practice that kind of politics. In the very short term, if the idea is to create some space in this country, then smart thing for secular politics would be to take a principled question, stand on the secular issue, but not to foreground it. It is by not foregrounding this issue. I know this would be a very unpopular thing to say. लेकिन सच बात यह है कि कांग्रेस ने इसको फोरग्राउंड नहीं किया, इसलिए कांग्रेस इलेक्शन जीती. अगर फोरग्राउंड करते तो हार जाते. इसलिए नहीं कि ये इशू ऐसा है जिसको कभी फोरग्राउंड नहीं करना चाहिए, मगर इसलिए क्योंकि इसके लिए जितनी लंबी तैयारी की जरूरत है. बेसिकली वी हैव लॉस्ट ए कल्चरल एंड आइडियोलॉजिकल बैटल. हम वो सब हारे हुए सिपाही हैं, और एक वो लड़ाई हारने के बाद फिर भी हम सोच रहे हैं कि चलो ये बैटल तो हार चुके हैं, लेकिन क्या कुछ शॉर्ट टर्म रास्ते निकाल सकते हैं, तो फिर वो आपको यूं करके ही निकालना पड़ेगा. That is the second lesson. The third lesson is what I call base of the pyramid politics. कांग्रेस ने जो किया वहां एसेंशियली यही था कि जो हमारा सोशो इकोनॉमिक पिरामिड है, looked at that in 4 dimensions. Look at it in terms of class. By class, I simply mean rich and poor. Nothing very complex. Second, gender. Third, caste. Fourth, rural urban. In all these 4 dimensions, Congress got disproportionate support from the lower half of the pyramid. And all the evidence by now has come out. We know that last time in Karnataka, rural and urban areas voted in the same way. This time, basically, Congress has won in the rural areas. Urban areas, में अभी भी Congress नहीं जीती है. Urban areas is sort of evenly matched. It's in the rural areas that Congress had a major advantage. In the class hierarchy, as you go down this battle, the ladder, it's absolutely textbook. बिल्कुल textbook का वो जो बनता है ना क्रॉस, वो आप बना सकते हैं इससे. As you go down the ladder, Congress's votes increase, BJP's votes come down. बिल्कुल neat relationship है. On the gender issue, Congress's advantage among women was almost twice as much as its vote share advantage among men. On the caste issue, it's the Ahinda politics. Basically, कर्नाटका की पॉलिटिक्स के बारे में जितना भी डिस्कशन होता है वो टॉप के 35% को लेके होता है. लिंगायत, वोकलिकास, ब्राह्मण्स, ये वो, ऑल ऑफ देम कॉन्स्टिट्यूट अबाउट 35% ऑफ कर्नाटका. और चर्चा खूब होती है, टिकट्स भी सभी नहीं को मिलते हैं, और वोट बाकी लोग देते हैं, और उन्होंने बाकी लोगों ने वोट देके कांग्रेस को जिताया. that's the अहिंदा पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ कर्नाटका. वो टिकट कांग्रेस ने भी इन्हीं को दिए थे, ऊपर 35 वालों को दिए थे, लेकिन वोट जो है वो, so the basic point I was making was that it is the base of the pyramid which has very which tilted heavily in favor of the Congress. And because the base is much bigger than the top, so BJP had the upper half, Congress had the lower half because the bottom half is much bigger than the upper half. Congress won. But broadly speaking, that's what the sociology of election was in Karnataka. So what is the lesson? To my mind, the lesson is that if we want to carve out a space in 24, I don't know whether BJP will be defeated, may not be defeated, or about election forecasting, I wonder why people used to do that. You know, I think it's not. You know, it's not like weather forecasting. Weather forecasting आप कर सकते हैं क्योंकि आप उसमें कुछ नहीं कर सकते. मगर election forecasting इसलिए नहीं करनी चाहिए क्योंकि हम इसमें कुछ कर सकते हैं. So to my mind, the important thing is what can we do about it? You know, rather than speculate and forecast what would happen in 24, a lot can be done. So my question is, what can we do to make 24 different? And the lessons are this: BJP can be defeated. It can be defeated provided you focus on the base of the pyramid, consciously do base of the pyramid politics, which is what Congress should have done all these years, but did not. And this base of the pyramid, incidentally, is not a politics of 50% or 60%. Actually, it's a politics of 98%. Because if you look at these four categories, those who are at the disadvantaged edge of either of these four, if you say any one of these four, 98% of Indian population is either woman or poor or rural or belong to SC, ST, OBC. So it's a politics of 8%, which is what needs to be done. Keep the focus firmly on issues to do with economy. Right now, economy is the pain point. Day before, yes, 2-3 days ago, there was a survey by CSDS Lokniti team, of which I am not a member anymore. But the survey basically shows economy is the pain point. And it's a very serious issue. Focusing on economy. Attention to base of pyramid, focusing on economy and the non-performance of the government. And not allow yourself to be distracted. Congress almost allowed itself to be distracted by the Bajrang Dal issue. Fortunately, sense prevailed and they stuck to what they were doing. Stick to that, keep it simple, and it makes a difference. The last point I want to say is about the role of the so-called civil society. So-called because I don't know whether it should be called civil society or not. वो सब बड़े theoretical discussion शुरू हो जाते हैं. So I'm just speaking of formations which are not political parties, or at least not political parties. I belong to a political party, but that's not a mainstream political party. So formations which are not mainstream political parties, which are either small marginal political parties or movements, movement groups, struggles, social organizations, all of them, who are political in that they have a political position, who have a political vision, who take political position, but have stayed away from elections. What we did was that in Karnataka, we tried to bring all of them together under Yedilu Karnataka. So we had Dalit organizations, Karnataka is exceptional in terms of its social movement quality. Karnataka Dalit Sangharsh Samiti, which is now by maybe 30-40 factions by now. But it's one of the most exciting experiments in Dalit politics. Karnataka has Karnataka Rajya Raiyat Sangha, one of the first forward-looking farmers' movements of the country. Then Karnataka has minority organizations, civil rights organizations. So what we did was we brought all of them together and we said we will not do traditional kind of intervention. We will not be non-interventionist. We will not simply say, oh, what's happening is bad, but what can we do? We shall intervene. we shall intervene not only in an abstract sense to say, please defeat BJP. We'll actually go and support those who can defeat BJP. And we will not think, we said we wanted to focus just on 60, 70 constituencies, but finally, as it happens in our country, we ended up going to 102 constituencies, but still less than half. We made focused effort in those 102 constituencies. Supported Congress in 93 of them, Janata Dal in 9 of them. And in those 93 constituencies, BJP held 60, Congress had 31. This time BJP has 30, Congress has 62. The entire equation reversed. I'm not saying only because of us, because many other things were happening, but because of my olden days of doing tables and so on, I actually took a swing analysis of vote share in the constituencies where we intervened versus those where we did not intervene. And the results were striking. Karnataka has overall 5% swing for Congress. Because last time Congress was ahead by 2 percentage points. This time it's ahead by 7 percentage points. So the total shift is 5%. Average swing was 5%. But in the constituencies where we sent our team, we had small team constituencies and big team constituencies. In the small team constituencies, the swing was 7.5%. And places where we sent big teams, which is about 50 or more, there was a 9.5% swing. So, to my mind, this may be one of the first instances where concerted, organized effort by actors outside the mainstream political parties actually made a difference to election outcome. And that's the last thing I want to say. वो कभी भी वो एडवर्टीजमेंट का मौका छोड़ना नहीं चाहिए. तो मैं यहाँ पे सिर्फ भाषण देने नहीं आया, आपका एनालिसिस करने नहीं आया, मैं आपको इनवाइट करने आया. इलेक्शन का फोरकास्ट मत कीजिए, इलेक्शन को बदलने की कोशिश कीजिए. नो, वो कहा था ना, द पॉइंट हाउएवर इज टू चेंज इट. तो द पॉइंट हाउएवर इज टू चेंज इट. और ये काम जो कर्नाटका में किया है, वो काम हम पूरे देश में कर सकते हैं. हम सब, and that's what we are doing. We've formed a coalition called Bharat Jodo Abhiyan, which has nothing to do with any party. और उसमें हम पूरे देश भर में पार्लियामेंट्री इलेक्शन में we are going to do exactly this. We'll probably end up selecting about 100 constituencies, which are the swing constituencies, which can go either way, where BJP can be defeated or the opposition won last time but may face a defeat this time. So we select marginal constituencies. And in those 100 or maybe 150, don't know how many, we'll try and put all our energy and stay there for 6 months, try and do what should be done. Because the BJP has RSS, the opposition has none. We have to play that role. We have to go. RSS के लोग अभी से 4 साल पहले से कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन Hello? Didn't like my advertisement. आरएसएस के लोग 4 साल का मैंडेट लेके कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसीज में बैठे हुए. They were placed, in fact, before COVID times, RSS people were placed in the constituency. Yeah, prepare का मतलब देखते हैं यहाँ पे 1000 वोट ऐसा है जिस जो कि तमिल स्पीकिंग है दिल्ली में, तो तमिलनाडु से किसी को बुला के उसको वहां बैठा. That kind of micro planning they do. Someone has to do it for the opposition. That's what we plan to do. Bharat Jodo Abhiyan is about trying to intervene in the elections by groundwork of the kind that we did in Karnataka. Also by communication, because BJP is a grand communication trick. So also उस कम्युनिकेशन को कैसे चैलेंज करें. So we want to work through ground action. और उसके अलावा we also want to take them on through communication. That's another part of what we did in Karnataka through Idina. हर रोज इनके झूठ को खत्म करना, क्योंकि we found out that parties like Congress were actually unable to take on their propaganda. They just don't have enough skills, enough expertise, enough people who would be devoted not to fighting elections but to doing this work. So we took on some of these roles. That is what needs to be done. So I would really urge all of you to think about it. This 24 election is not an ordinary election. बिल्कुल देश के लिए वो हाईवे है जिस पे एक बार आप चढ़ गए 20 साल के लिए फिर कोई यू टर्न इस देश को है, और उसके बाद आपको नॉर्मल पॉलिटिक्स कहाँ मिलेगी मैं नहीं जानता. उसके बाद आप यहाँ ऐसी मीटिंग्स कर सकेंगे, आई डोंट थिंक सो. उसके बाद ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन हमारा बचेगा, आई एम रीजनेबली श्योर नो. जिस तरह का जो निवेदिता ने बताया कल परसों जो वो हुआ सेरेमनी हुई, दैट्स ओनली वन स्टेप अवे फ्रॉम व्हाट दे वांट. इसके बाद क्या बचता है? ऑफिशियली इतना ही बचता है ना कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का. वैसे भी इस देश का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्या है ये तो थानेदार तय करता है, ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट थोड़ी तय करता है. और थानेदार ने ऑलरेडी तय कर रखा है कि इस देश का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बदल चुका है. So we are only one step away from all this. 2024 is critical. And may I invite all of you to think, if you can give some time, a few months of your life, maybe the next 11 months of your life, to doing what best you can do. Maybe you can create memes, maybe you can write poems, maybe you can just do some social media stuff. Maybe you can go back to the place you came from and spend 8 months there. कहिएगा मैं फील्ड वर्क में जा रहा हूँ. फील्ड वर्क ही है ना ये भी, तो फील्ड वर्क करके आइएगा. तो ये करके तो ऑन बिहाफ, और मैं नहीं कह रहा कि सिर्फ भारत जोड़ो अभियान के लिए कीजिए, किसी और के लिए कर लीजिए, जो इफेक्टिव करे उसके साथ कर लीजिए. किसी पार्टी के लिए कर दीजिए, किसी ऑपोजिशन पार्टी के लिए कर दीजिए, जो बीजेपी को हरा सके उसके लिए कर दीजिए. This is nothing short of a battle to save this country. आप ऐसे भी देखिए ना, हमें इस देश की आजादी के लिए लड़ने का मौका नहीं मिला, पैदा ही नहीं हुए थे तब. आप में से ज्यादातर को 75, 77 में भी कुछ करने का मौका नहीं मिला होगा. हम लोग पैदा तो हुए थे लेकिन कुछ करने की हालत में नहीं थे तब, तो हमें भी मौका नहीं मिला. तो मोदी जी ने मौका दिया. थैंक यू मोदी जी.
थैंक यू ऑल ऑफ यू. अब हम क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन के लिए आगे करेंगे, जो क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहते हो पूछ सकते हैं.
अरे एडवर्टाइजमेंट के बाद मैं वो कांटेक्ट देना भूल गया था. माय ईमेल आईडी इज व्हाटएवर यू थिंक इट इज, namely yogendra.yadav@gmail.com. Feel free to write to me.
बोलो बोलो.
ऐसे बोलो भाई, ऐसे बोलो.
My question, yes, sir. As you have mentioned, there is some sort of problem the way opposition is doing politics, but there is a constant attack on opposition through media networks and democratic institutions. What is the overall impact on Indian politics? The second thing is in context of welfare politics.
It's working. Because people can't hear you.
In context of welfare politics, what is the impact of direct benefit transfer, which is advertised through Prime Minister Narendra Modi? How it connects rural Indian with central government in parliamentary elections?
Hello, sir. I think we missed out on a point. I feel there was an act of an error of judgment from the BJP side, and the error of judgment was they think they can fight and win every election with projecting the face of Mr. Prime Minister, which has been not succeeded in this election. And very clearly, they are very reluctant in accepting a very popular chief minister. Uh, Probably because Mr. Prime Minister himself was a very popular chief minister before becoming a very popular prime minister. So does BJP's future depend on their acceptance of a popular face as a chief minister or as a regional leader?
Yes, always.
I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Yes. We talked about the lessons that we but what I also feel is that every setback for the ruling party is also a lesson which can act as a corrective for the ruling party as well. Now, what happens is that for a dominant party, it's actually a dominant party that is also a carter based and social dominant party. These lessons, these directives, it's for themselves to implement. For example, we remember 2019, in the run-up to the election, we were talking about rural distress and all of that, and then they came up with all of those cash transfer policies. We were talking about the Wisconsin that was spilling over the farm laws, and then the government decides 1 year before to actually scrap them, and then there is a forgetfulness that happens. So for a dominant party which is constantly also engaged in using its setbacks as correctives and making technical retreats, how do you propose to actually grip this kind of a strategy that the government is?
I had one. Am I audible? I had a bunch of questions. Firstly, to Ajay, you said that in one of the strategies in fighting the propaganda and communication is one aspect that you're focusing on. So I would like to know, like, what is the exact strategy that you're using to battle it? And then, secondly, I wanted to know what was the common ground. Like, when you saying that there has to be interventionist policy in letting have a common basis for current or for other groups as well. What was the common basis in Karnataka where you think was in favor of the opposition and Congress? And then Nivedita Menon, I hope I'm not taking wrong name. Nivedita Menon had a question that when you spoke about riots not being a part of the and that they have been trying to have their own definition policy. Back in 2011, there were campaigns made by Congress itself when it was in the opposition to have a revised regulation. However, it did not go in Congress's favor. There is most of the revised votes still tend to be open. So, how would you answer that? That despite this caste community following the remarks that it had made for so long, in 2018 elections, it did not go on with Congress and rather voted. My question was that when we started to decoding Karnataka election, a major thing that came up was a big call against the hijab ban. And also we said that the Congress photo share was largely policies to hold out like that. So why women still remain a significant contributor as I think in 55% of the states the women voter turnout was more than men. So while this remain a significant contributor in this taking the lane that led to that high rate, I think only Congress nominated only 11 women out of which 4 won. BJP all in all 10 11 women legislators won. So even if we triumphantly congratulate this Dakshin Bharat, even if it doesn't still remain Mahila Swaraj Yojana. So will Congress parties and our parties seeking this hope will ever start in politics? Your
Good evening and good evening to everyone. My name is Charya. I am from Sweden. My question is that in this election, if we got defeat, the vote share of BJP is the same as the last election. That is, percentage is the vote share, and in last election was the same. But the number of vote share. But whereas we see that the JDS vote share has gone down. So it's not like how has like the BJP lost? What is the significant loss for the elections in that context? That's substantive. The second question is, can we implement a proportional representation in a system? Does this also there is the need of transition from one part of vote? Yeah, because of the difference in the vote share and the system in every election after the election. So does this merit a broader unity of the minority? You said that with the BJP, so Manila decides the constitution. Let's agree for a moment. How far we can sure about that if the transition will be in favor of Congress or any other political party, then the institutional framework of deciding constitution will be on Bhadidar rather than a Supreme Court. So it's more than a party system thing, or it's more than an institutional thing. Like there should be institutional reform rather than only party reform.
हेलो सर, जैसे भी कर्नाटका का इलेक्शन हुआ और उसमें कांग्रेस एक खंड मेजॉरिटी से आई, लेकिन जो CSDS का डाटा जैसे ओकालिंग और लिंगायत लिंगायत का जो बीजेपी को एब्वियसली कांग्रेस से ज्यादा है और ओकालिंग का JDS को गया, लेकिन जो मुस्लिम वोट था जो करीब 13-14% जो था वो एक बार पूरा कांग्रेस को मिला। लेकिन जब रिप्रेजेंटेशन की बात आती है, जब मिनिस्ट्री की बात आती है, तो मुसलमानों को उसमें 2 मिनिस्ट्री थी और इसमें इंक्लूडिंग एक स्पीकर भी था। और वो जो मिनिस्ट्री का जो पोर्टफोलियो होता है वो भी वक्फ माइनॉरिटी दिया जाता है या हज एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में दिया जाता है। तो और ओकालिंगा और लिंगायत की जो मिनिस्ट्री होती है 6-7 मिनिस्ट्री बनते हैं और अच्छी मिनिस्ट्री मिलती है। तो जो मुसलमानों का वोट है, तो जो बीजेपी की एक हेडेड पॉलिटिक्स है, क्या उसी का फॉर ग्रांटेड लेकर चाहे वो कांग्रेस है चाहे जो रीजनल पार्टियां उसको लेती हैं और वोट देने के बाद उनकी जब भागीदारी नहीं देती है, तो जैसे सर ही ने कहा कि जो मुसलमानों के इशू है, तो क्या फिर उसके जो कम्युनल पॉलिटिक्स जो रिलीजन की पॉलिटिक्स होता है उनको एक स्पेस मिलता है? तो इसमें आप जो सो कॉल्ड जो पॉलिटिक्स है, चाहे सेक्युलर पॉलिटिक्स जो मुसलमानों को तो करती है, तो उसमें आप किस तरह इसको देखते हैं इस रिप्रेजेंटेशन को?
Can I speak from here? My question is to Nivedita ma'am. You talk about heterogenizing the category of minority. Like heterogenizing the category of minority, my question is it possible to say that the status of a person from Muslim minority similar to the status of a minority, say of a Parsi community or Sikh community or even women, is heterogenizing it enough or sufficient to lead us to some kind of a commonality that minorities share, this irrespective of where they might be coming from gender or religion or.
Can I add something? This is very relevant question. Question that is to you, ma'am. Because you were saying that what we need to do, we need to basically rely on something conservative. Sir was saying that we have very important Indian public sphere. We don't have social angle in terms of political angle. You were saying precisely the reason that you don't take cultural martial positions in the ground. And I think the more relevant issues of what Sir was saying, that you can't have universal solidarity based on communities, based on by using public sphere through a language which works more generally in terms of cultural recognition. I think the more immense possibility will come only to talk about in terms of redistribution politics rather than geographical politics. We have seen multicultural politics in the West has led to populism of both sides because those recognitions have led to unification of identities, then unification has led to kind of subsumption of the individual identity community. So I think how do you respond to this point? That fight against the populism should be based on more universal solidarities which come through by taking recourse to politics of redistribution, not primarily to the politics of development.
Why can't we say in the lens of reason? Because Karnataka elections would likely be in the lens of reason. Why was in the Lok Sabha elections last year, Karnataka people spent 25 people for parliament? Instead of that, they were not talking to a single word when it comes to the regional matters. Any matter even a division of power or division of finance, and even in Canada issues, they are trying to impose a policy on Canada people. Plus, and you told that Canada is studying major role. Except one country, I think in last elections you have opposed my country, right? Except that one, and none of the constituency have that much hold in the farmers' hold. Still, we have issues in Northern Karnataka, but the major political issues not taken away. And why that? People will
Okay, let me begin with something that I actually wanted to talk about, but never got mentioned. And that is the 4% Muslim quota issue. If anything, the way that the BJP brought this, especially the Home Minister, Amit Shah, there was a sadistic element here. Okay, we took it from the Muslims, we're giving it to someone else. Now, I think what this represents is the way that the Muslim is imagined by the BJP, which means two things. Firstly, there is a Muslim problem the BJP has. And secondly, there's a Muslim obsession the BJP has. Okay? Now, Ajay talked about oscillations, and I want to add to that point because in 2014, the first when Mr. Modi came to power, what we noticed was a complete abstinence on the issue of the communal issue. What about development? Obviously, that didn't work out in terms of the mishandling of the economy that we have seen. And therefore, now what the BJP is left with is its Muslim obsession problem. That it can only talk about this, and it talks about it in a very cruelly sadistic way. So, of course, this got the Supreme Court strictures because of the way that Mr. Shah was talking about something which was sub judice. So, I think it's important to understand that much as the BJP has tried to extract certain electoral mileage by invoking the Muslim as a figure of hatred, perhaps there will be some limit to this. It can't go on milking the issue in the way that it has been. So there was a question about Muslim empowerment and representation. Someone over there, I don't know if the person is still here. Oh, there you are, right? So yes, I agree with you. That there's always been a problem. And I think this is a much larger issue that this country will have to solve. Even when the BJP was not around, when you had the Congress, there was a certain communal problem that the Congress had in terms of envisioning what the role of the Muslim is, or the position of Muslims. As this country crafts and configures its future, this will become a central question. The Dalit issue, of course, very central, and the Muslim issue. Because even supposedly secular parties have always talked about secularism in an extremely instrumental sort of way. Let me add one more point about secularism. I think the other was talking about. the way that secularism is invoked in this country is like you've seen the Dracula movies, where the crucifix is always kind of held when Dracula is approaching. The more you hold it, the more Dracula will come to you. And I think this is the way that secularism has been kind of used as this kind of magic chant, it'll go away, it'll go away. And I think, again, both of you, Nivedita, you were also making this point, that there is a serious need to re-envision secularism. Now, let me add one thing. The two words, secularism and socialism, came together in the 42nd Amendment. And my own understanding of it is that the only path to the redemption of secularism in this country lies on a socialistic path. Okay, in terms of the conjoined way that those two concepts were brought into in very questionable ways. The urgency was too long. And secular politics cannot just be talked about by invoking secularism and the position of Muslims. There's something much larger at issue here, which is what will be the role that this country will give to the Muslim, to the Dalit, and the most marginalized. The Muslim, of course, becomes very problematic here because the way that not just the BJP, but the Congress has played an extremely communal position in terms of the Muslim presence. Whereby, Muslim has to be given a certain kind of a symbolic representation in Congress. Okay. Even that doesn't exist. Okay, so that's what I wanted to.
No, I think these are all very intricate questions, so it's difficult to get into the details of a lot of your questions on identity and things like that. But let me just broaden because we are getting too focused. Right? This is a global phenomenon. Whether you take the white working class response in the Rust Belt in the United States, whether you take Brazil, whether you take Turkey, or whether you take India. So there is something happening across globe. That old language of secular majority minority rights discourse, the constitutional discourse, somewhere is getting exhausted. People are, Akhil Bilgrami made a very interesting observation somewhere that if people know by whatever rules you play a game of chess and you know that you're going to end up on the losing side, people are going to overthrow the board of chess. This is what is happening across board. This whole question of communalism, illiberality, anti-constitutionalism, anti-minoritism is all there. That's one part. But that's not a story that is going to exhaust what's happening. That's not telling us the fulcrum of what's happening. That this illiberality is emerging from certain legitimate anxieties. You might call it anxieties of modernity, anxieties of neoliberal capitalism, but there is something very big happening out there, and I don't think opposition parties have any big alternative. It's only a basic electoral game of who wins where. So that's why Karnataka elections, Congress might have won, but I don't think it's a very decisive victory of any kind, because what is the agenda that Congress has? It has just five those basic points: free travel for women, which are, this kind of transactional welfareism, I think people are sick and tired of. People are looking for something big, but opposition wants to win without doing anything. That is the crisis of neoliberalism. Unless you have difference on economic policies, today you don't have a difference between, forget right and Congress, between right and left on economic issues. Why is that in spite of this kind of breathing down of a majoritarian politics for last 10 years that Congress does not come with a more robust social welfare agenda? So everyone is trying to play the game within those set dominant rules, and within that, therefore, we should organize a meeting not just on BJP and RSS, you should organize one meeting on opposition parties. What is that they have a promise in 2024? I mean, if I just get up from my sleep and ask early morning what BJP stands for, I'm very clear. I get up and ask what Congress stands for, मुझे अभी भी clarity नहीं है युगेंद्र. वो भारत जोड़ो तो ठीक है, मोहब्बत है, लेकिन किसका मोहब्बत, कौन किसके साथ चल रहा है, कुछ total chaos. What is, I ask Congress guys when I write my Congress, tell me 3 strong points of your politics, which people should vote for. Muslim representation, you are confused. Secularism, you don't know what it means. You sometimes play soft, sometimes strong, sometimes you support, even Rajasthan, mob lynching also, Pehlu Khan, they did not take a strong position. What does the Congress stand for? So I think it has to begin with something agenda that is very, very different. So I don't see this whole thing just through the lens of increasing communalism, increasing illiberality. I think this illiberality has some genuine, legitimate liberal aspirations. I've seen this in Brazil, in my visit during Brazil, that people were aspiring for more universities, more access to education. One reason why they brought back Lula is because of that. Lula took universities to regional spaces, and I interacted with youth. they still remembered that. What is that Congress is ready to promise? So I think we'll have to ask a different set of questions. So I think this framing, our own framing is also has become between Hindu Muslim, but I don't think Hindu Muslim is the. In fact, I see this Muslim thing as a red herring of neoliberalism by the BJP. You just keep pushing that red herring, and you see, therefore, contextually it keeps changing. People don't look up. Suddenly, you will be surprised that for people this doesn't matter. In spite of hijab and halal, all those issues in Karnataka, it suddenly did not matter. So I think we should raise certain questions also for the opposition parties. Question of anti-caste politics, what should be the social character of religious minorities politics. I think a range of other social questions of social citizenship have to be raised before I think we simply focus on this kind of clubbing it either as majoritarianism, illiberalism, or Islamophobia. I don't think captures what is happening on the ground. Also on the front of caste, I think old categories of Brahmanism may not be able to capture because people are seeing the process very, very differently. Look at OBCs being attracted to Shiv Charcha in Uttar Pradesh. There's massive turnout. Look at the turnout for Baba Bhageshwar. Forget Shiv Charcha. And we have to explain those things. We cannot escape all of that. What does that religiosity mean in the subaltern context? Forget the top 5%. What does it mean? Why are the people coming in such big numbers? So somewhere I think if you don't find explanations to all of that, I think we are on the losing wicket, whether it's 24 or 29. I think we have to raise first the correct kind of questions and push opposition very hard to bring some big ticket social welfare policies, and that can be a starting point for the alternative policy.
Okay, so I'm not sure why it occurred, or why it appeared to you that I was promoting recognition over redistribution. So first of all, I don't like that framing. That we have to stop using that framing of Nancy Fraser, redistribution versus recognition, because redistribution and recognition are inextricably linked. Today, if you are a Muslim, you will not get anything under this regime. Dalits don't get. So the identity politics is not something apart from redistribution. Identity politics and what is called identity politics, which again I find a very problematic term, because it assumes that there is some kind of politics which is not identity politics. All politics is identity politics, even class politics is identity politics. So I find these terms are very misleading, and by no means am I suggesting. And so that whole critique you made that you let of that kind of thing that you enter into a multicultural, that was not the argument that I was making. I was simply stepping. What I was doing was agreeing with Amir and Ajay, who had spoken before me, that these kinds of issues about the socio-economic, the economic agenda are absolutely crucial. I wanted to speak about something else, not only reiterate what they said. So I agreed with them, and what that something else was to challenge the idea that there is such a thing as a Hindu majority, on the basis of which Hindutva politics functions, and to push for the recognition that, and this has been assumed by non-Hindu right also. Nehru assumed it. Everybody assumes that those who are not Hindu, Muslim, Christian, those who are not Muslim, Christian, Parsi are Hindus. So we need to challenge that. We need to recognize that India is a country of minorities, and that builds a different kind of democracy. If there is no majority, there cannot be a majoritarian politics. So my point was that it was not about. So I was simply stepping away from that point to make another point, which was. So my entire thing was directly to challenge the idea of Hindutva, which does not, the basis of Hindutva, which does not necessarily have to be the basis for future election campaigns. I agree that that has to be, but that has to be somewhere. We have to start raising the issue of caste, not just raising, but making it central to the idea that there cannot be a Hindu majority. There is no Hindu majority. It is a legal fiction. It is a legal fiction, and it's like a prison, and whenever anyone tries to escape that prison, like Lingayats or Ramakrishna Mission or Sikhs, or you're brought back because of the common sense assumption that if you're not Muslim, Christian, or Parsi, then what are you? So that's my answer to you. There was a question from here about Lingayats so that they voted for the Congress anyway and so on. So first of all, again, I'm not talking of Lingayats in this governmentalizing mode of whether they get reservations or not. I'm talking about the fact that Lingayats from the 12th century onwards and at the time of the formation of the constitution were saying they are not Hindu, not to get reservations, but because they're rejecting Brahmanism. So we are forgetting political questions if we transform and translate everything in terms of these governmentalizing modes of, they want OBC reservations, or they want minority benefits. I don't know what benefit minorities are getting today, but that's not the point. And as a matter of interest, of course, in this election, Congress has swept the Lingayat seats anyway. I mean, in terms of they have not lost Lingayat votes, and they in 2018 brought about that legislation giving them and Veerashaiva minority status. But I don't want to speak in those terms about, that was not my point, that what can a community do or what should the Congress or any party do to get this community's vote. It doesn't work like that. If we listen to what Yogendra was saying, who actually worked on the ground in Karnataka, it does not simply translate into votes. So I'm not interested in asking. I wanted to ask a different set of questions. So I don't know how many Lingayats voted for the Congress or not. But Lingayats have been saying they are not Hindu. What are we going to do about this? What does it mean when they say that? I think there was a misunderstanding. I never said heterogenizing minorities. I talked about the fact that number one, that this is a country of minorities, and Brahminism is one of the minorities, and everybody else is multiple kinds of religious communities. So this is a country of minorities. This is what I said. That this is what we have to recognize. There is no Hindu majority. That's what I wanted to say. And that's what I thought I was saying. I talked about the fact that democracy is heterogeneous. And that's what I concluded with. And when I say democracy is heterogeneous, I mean, of course, that there is no particular mode in which democracy necessarily operates where ideas translated to votes, etc. I wanted to talk about democracy as a horizon, where there is no point at which democracy is fully achieved. I wanted to remind ourselves that democracy is something we can make happen regardless of who is in power. And while completely agreeing with you again that if you miss the U-turn, you've missed the U-turn, you're on your way to a city you didn't want to go. While agreeing with that, I still do feel that we cannot function on the assumption that if 24 is lost to us, we will not be able to fight for democracy and to continually heterogenize democracy. That was my point. So there was some misunderstanding there. I did also just want to say something about the rules of the game. I think that question came from here. I don't think it was directly addressed to me, but I do want to talk about that because Yogen also mentioned the way in which the BJP has a machinery. And I know what I have to say is not very popular among my friends. It's seen as a depoliticizing kind of a point to raise. But we do have to focus on the fact that there is an issue with EVMs. I know Yogen doesn't agree with me, many people don't. I have friends who say such a depoliticizing thing. It's the minds of people that have been manipulated, not the EVMs, etc. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of important information we have. There are, for example, in 2015, I'm forgetting the date now, but an RTI revealed that there was a massive discrepancy of EVMs produced, I think this was 2015, EVMs produced and EVMs that reached the Election Commission of India, in lakhs. And on the basis of that, this case was taken to the Bombay High Court. It's sitting there. That case is just sitting there. No one's interested in what are these missing EVMs. So the kind of swing. I'm going to use your example to simply bolster my claim. He said, Yogen said, constituencies in which BJP should have, you put it very well, lost. They won by a razor-thin margin, and there was so that's kind of where they win by the razor-thin margins so many seats in the Bihar election. And you just have to control a few EVMs. You don't have to control every constituency. You don't have to control every polling booth. You just have to control a few EVMs. And every election shows us pictures of EVMs being coming out of people's cars and people's homes. So I think we have to talk about EVMs and we have to ask ourselves why there are 8 phase elections. Why do the elections start at the beginning of April and go on till the end of April? What is happening to the EVMs during that month? Suddenly, at the end, there's a protection of the EVMs, and the people come out on the streets. But for 1 month, those EVMs are being stored somewhere. So I'm sorry, we can't keep saying this is fascism, and then pretending it's a simple democracy where election may be go and everything will be hunky dory. I completely agree with the person behind me who asked the question about what happens about the rules of the game. I don't think he meant EVMs, but I do want to use this opportunity to talk about the fact that the BJP will go to any extent. Why do we think they will not? Demonetization fill the coffers of BJP and the RSS. Demonetization performs that function. So they don't play a fair game. They're not here to make sure that the majority wins. They do not play a fair game. They have institutional systems of riot production. They have complete control. Every institution is under their control. The ED, the ways in which people are being harassed for dissenting. So I think the rules of the game is something we need to be very aware of, and I think the opposition parties should be and are aware of it, apart from everything else, agreeing with everything that everyone else is.
Sorry, I do realize it's quite late, so I'm trying to keep it short. On the Thanedar thing, my simple point was not that under BJP Thanedar determines what the Constitution of India is. My general proposition is that for 99% of people in this country, the SHO decides what is the Constitution of India. Because only those 1% who can afford to go to court, High Court, Supreme Court, they can exercise their constitutional right. But if a Thanedar says, your name is Ashish and your name is Amir, I'll treat you differently. So for all practical purposes, the Constitution of India has changed. That's the point I was making. This holds as much for Congress as for any other party. That's the point. Allow me to skip your question about proportional representation in FTPC. It's a long debate. I happen to have a position, which is that we get quite excited about proportional representation without realizing its political consequences. So we'll fight it out some other day. On the vote share thing of the BJP, you are quite right to say that if we look at the overall vote share, the first impression we get is BJP did not lose any votes. Janata Dal lost votes, Congress gained votes. So Janata Dal votes went to Congress, and that's why Congress won. BJP is where it was. Actually, if you look at it more closely, that's not the picture. That's a picture that, BJP has just such smart spin doctors who within hours come up with spin on, how television channels should play it out. So it's one of those spins. The reality is if you break Karnataka into different regions, in the 4 major regions of Karnataka, BJP lost its votes, Congress gained, and there was no JDS playing any big role there. It's only in the 2 regions of southern Karnataka, Old Mysore and by Bangalore, where JDS is something of a player. So it's a more complex situation. The fact is that BJP lost some of its support base, though not as much as one would have thought they would lose. That is correct. The question about was there an error of judgment about leadership and so on? I don't know. I think in a sense BJP was playing a long-term game. So you could say that BJP paid a short-term price for a long-term gain. Basically, RSS ideologues of BJP were sick and tired of mainstream BJP people who were dominating Karnataka politics. And they decided this is the time we can get rid of them. They overcalculated. They overplayed their hand. And in that sense, call it error of judgment or call it just arrogance. This routinely happens in politics. Political actors tend to believe कैसी भी सरकार चला लो, आखिरी 5 दिन में मैं जाऊंगा, हिंदू मुसलमान कर दूंगा, इलेक्शन जीत लेंगे. That's what Modi ji thought. And in this instance, like a couple of other instances, he was horribly wrong in that reading. But do remember, BJP has actually made long-term gains in Karnataka by getting rid of the leadership, which cost them election this time. So we should not forget that fact. Lessons for BJP. Yes, I indeed do think that what distinguishes BJP from many other parties of our country, most opposition parties, is that BJP as an election machine is very quick about learning lessons. They're very quick. By now, they have already processed what were the lessons. Some of those lessons have already been implemented in Madhya Pradesh. So they are onto it. And most opposition parties are simply no match. It's just a question of machine, not EVM. I'll come back to EVM. But just the election organizational machine part of it. We seriously underestimate, and I guess at least 3 to 4% votes get shifted by this absolutely legitimate method of having a election agent in every single booth, of doing the kind of things they do. So BJP has learned. That's what distinguishes BJP from others. Opposition, to my mind, a good team is not that reflects only after they have lost. A good team is one which sits back to reflect after its victory. I mean, in cricket or in politics, a team that has won a match and sits down and says, "What mistakes did we make?" That's a great team. I don't know how many opposition parties would qualify to be great teams in that case. On the question of women, I mean, Nivedita has partly answered that question. I just wanted to say in Karnataka, the women's vote made a difference. But it was not via the hijab issue. It was primarily through some of the targeted things that Congress had done for women. More than the bus travel, which was announced towards the end, and I don't think many women even knew about it. But 2,000 rupees per month to women, head of the household. That was known. I mean, I traveled extensively in Karnataka. Every woman had heard about it. It made a difference. Whether it is transactional and one of those very tiny things, I'll just come back to. On the caste breakup, the Muslim question. That's a, you see, so that there's a double whammy now. The fact is, you are absolutely right that Muslims have been systematically underrepresented, not just this time, not just Karnataka, throughout India's electoral history. By and large, Muslims' share in this legislature has been half or less than their share in population. That's the norm. Karnataka is no exception. Karnataka had, this time I think they have 7 Muslim MLAs, which is about 3% of population, 3%, while their share in population is 13%, close to 14. So there's a very severe underrepresentation of Muslims. The logic, and there is a very perverse logic at work this year. So when we were speaking to Muslim groups, interestingly, most of the Muslim groups said, do not put up many Muslim candidates. They said, BJP jeet jayegi, mat karna hai. They were so scared. Serious Muslim groups told us, please go and advise Congress not to put too many Muslim candidates. We want BJP to lose. We don't want too many Muslims in the assembly. वो बाद में देख लेंगे. लंबी लड़ाई है वो बाद में. This is the double whammy. So not mere. So Muslims are underrepresented. One, because every disadvantaged group in this country is underrepresented. If there was no reservation for SC/ST, they would be underrepresented. Lower OBCs are underrepresented. Even the upper OBCs are underrepresented. So that's one. In that logic, Muslims are underrepresented. But there's a second logic at work which does not operate for other categories, which is Muslims lose because they are Muslims. So if there's a constituency where Muslims are less than 10%, no party would give them ticket anyway. If there's a constituency where more than 30% Muslims, then BJP would be able to counter mobilize all the Hindus and that candidate would lose. So there's a very perverse logic at work. You've correctly identified it. There's no straight answer to this. And in fact, that's the real tragedy of electoral politics, that it actually cements marginalization. Uh, on the regional issue, I agree a bit of regional issue was at play, and many of my friends said that in the last instance, what BJP was doing did not gel with the, Kannadiga makeup. It doesn't gel with our society. I thought they were making more abstract point. It came up in a couple of ways. The Nandini issue came up, which is a sort of federal issue. And in one or two respects, they did manage to do it. I personally don't think it was a dominant factor playing into election this time. It is true that Congress in Karnataka is the more rooted party, more rooted in the regional local sentiment than the BJP. And BJP is very much the homogenizing kind of party. How much of it was played in this election, I'm not entirely sure. About hold of civil society throughout so you are from Melkote in Mandya district, which is where the one candidate from farmers movement supported by Congress won. The lesson for us was this: when we movement groups, farmers groups, Dalit groups, when we try to contest elections on our own, we fail miserably because the requirements of scale are simply so huge that we cannot cross the entry gate. Incidentally, I should mention to you, in case you don't know, what's the going rate in Karnataka? You spend 10 crores to lose an election. That is to say, if you want to simply get yourself registered, कि हाँ मैंने भी election लड़ा, 2-5 लोगों को याद रहेगा, you spend about 10 crores. The upper limit is what, about 40 lakh rupees. If you want to win an election in a rural constituency, about 25 to 30 crores. If you want to win in any of the urban constituencies, 30 to 50 crore rupees per MLA seat per candidate. This is the kind of expenditure involved in election, and I'm not naming any one party. So we have realized that when movement groups go and contest elections on their own, we simply are unable to match the requirement of scale in terms of resources and also in terms of sheer number, because movements have greater visibility. But when the sheer logic of numbers, 10 lakh votes, 5 lakh votes, that kind of thing comes in, our sizes are actually small. But when we put our small size effectively to support someone who already has that scale, then we can tilt the balance. That's the role we play. So while in Karnataka, you are right, there's only one constituency where farmers on their own can win elections. But mind you, even they won because of Congress support. But there are many constituencies where if Dalit movement and farmers movement come together, and Karnataka is one of those rare places in India where Dalit and farmers movement can sit on the same table and actually work together. In the rest of the country, it's unthinkable. But in Karnataka, it does happen. So when they come together, they become the force that can tip the balance. That's one lesson that we learned. So we can make a difference, provided we don't ourselves contest elections. About rules of the game, actually there is a difference between what Nivedita said and I said, but the difference is much less. I actually do agree that we should insist on EVM reforms. I do agree that we should ask for the EVM slips, the VVPAT slips, to be matched to the electronic count. That should be our basic demand. So on what we should demand, I completely agree. Where we disagree is an academic point about whether in reality election results have been altered in the past, whether we can attribute any of the electoral successes of BJP to EVM manipulation so far. And my only limited point has been, since I've had some technical interest in that area, I have so far not found convincing evidence. And you would agree with me that I'm not short on motives to find evidence against Mr. Modi. I want to find evidence. As So far, I've not found it. The day I find it, I'll be broadcasting it. I think the real thing about rules of the game is this. So the difference, if any, is about which of the unfair practices BJP relies upon. The simple practices are the following, and I learned some of these in Karnataka. Number one, BJP ensures that about 5 to 10,000 voters' names are deleted right in the beginning. So this is, and using legitimate means. I mean, legitimate in the sense of all this is not underhand. This is put on the board. And yes, if you struggle and want to get your name back, you can do it. But 5,000 में से कितने करवाएंगे? 2,000, 3,000, वो भी करवा लिया, 2,000 तो कट गए. That's one technique that I have used at a very large scale. And obviously, those who get deleted are Muslims, are those caste and communities which they think will not vote for us. That's one. Technically visible. I mean, it's not like the e-game manipulation, not that kind of underhand. Number two is complete control over media. It's astonishing how Kannada media, I mean, speaking of South exceptionalism, I think it was extraordinary for me to see that Kannada media was no different from Hindi media of Uttar Pradesh. Completely one-sided, except one newspaper, Prajavani and completely one-sided. We could not get one of the top 6 channels. One of the top 6 would not carry minimal news about, what the opposition was doing. The day Priyanka Gandhi was campaigning, and that day Mr. Modi was also there. So Congress, I know, put in a lot of effort to ensure that Priyanka Gandhi gets some attention. So you would say, all right, Mr. Modi would get 70% attention, she would get 30% attention. And you know what was the score? 100% Mr. Modi, 0 Priyanka. This is the coverage ratio of Kannada news channels. So that's the second, major thing they do. Third is, of course, money. Huge money is being spent. Congress also spent a lot of money. BJP outdid it, and it's only in the last few years that I've started hearing Congress people saying, "हमारे पास पैसा नहीं." So मुझे कई बार हंसी भी आती थी. Yeah, and so it's electoral bonds is a way of getting it, but you see what's happening. The money that's coming to them through electoral bonds is actually tip of the iceberg. The real thing is Mauritius. That's where. What is this Adani money? Where is this money coming from? That Mauritius is the root. Electoral bond तो फिर भी शरीफों का बेईमानी करने का तरीका है. This is tiny bit. And also, one of the pure manipulation that they do is something simple, but you can do it only if you have organizational strength. Namely, in every booth, they sit in the morning. Or morning, sorry, it's a minor thing, but I just have to mention it because it makes a difference. There's a rule that you initially check your EVM. There's the dummy thing. You cast some 30, 40 dummy votes to ensure and to show to everyone that it ho gaya. After that, you delete it and then you set the meter afresh. That's the rule. So what happens is that in places where opposition has electoral election agent, they would, of course, all this would be followed. But there would be many booths in every constituency. It could be 20%, 30%, 40% booths, where after this initial dummy thing, so BJP person would reach, opposition would not have their person there, and they would manage to punch the initial things. So the meter would begin with BJP 35, opposition 4. Now, remember, this is already tilting the overall election by something like 1%. And remember, with 1% vote, you lose about 10 to 12 seats. These are the things they do. And towards the end, most opposition booth workers disappear after 3 o'clock. BJP people, RSS people stay there till 6 o'clock. And they ensure that final 15 votes are pushed through that. These are the real manipulations that they do. So those are things which we need to face. And of course, rules of the game is a joke by now. Election Commission is a complete joke. Basically what Mr. Modi said, Bajrang Bali ka naam leke vote dalna. This is a straight crime. It's a crime under Indian Penal Code. It's a crime against election laws. It's a crime which has been reiterated to be a crime 4 years ago by the Supreme Court of India. So yes, but the trouble, the problem is that if you want to intervene in 2024, you have to take all this as given. ये सब होगा 24। दिल्ली है, आज अच्छा मौसम है, तो जून के महीने में गर्मी तो होती है दिल्ली में। तो अब आप इसको ऐसा मान लीजिए कि जून का महीना है, गर्मी तो होगी, 40 डिग्री टेम्परेचर तो होगा और आपको पैदल चलना है। अब कितना शिकायत करेंगे कि दिल्ली में इतनी गर्मी क्यों? तो ये बिल्कुल वैसा मामला हो गया है। इलेक्शन कमीशन की पार्टीजनशिप इज जस्ट वन ऑफ दोज थिंग्स राइट नाउ। Finally, the question about communication strategy, because I think it's a very important question, because we constantly make mistakes on this. Because, and how do you communicate? I mean, first of all, who do we communicate with? I really think most of us, and when I say us, I mean liberal, secular, people who sit here, JNU wale, Dadi wale, Jhola wale, all this. The problem they have is that they speak only to the converts most of the time. And they speak to non-converts in a way that it would drive them away. So we actually do not know how to speak to people who are on the borderline. The art of communication, BJP understands it better than we do. The art of communication is to keep your focus on someone who can go this way or that. Not bothered about those who are your supporters anyway, and those who would never come to you anyway. Most of our conversation is not addressed to them. Number two, most of us, including me, I must confess, are Modi obsessed. The more Modi obsessed we are, the more we help Mr. Modi. Number three, most of us do not draw upon the cultural resources that are available to us to take on the BJP. We use a language which is alien. We use a metaphor which doesn't gel with people. In the last instance, the battle against BJP can be won only by developing a deep relationship to the cultural resources, multiple cultural resources that we have inherited from the multiple traditions that we have. As long as we keep those traditions as untouchable, we will keep losing this battle over and over and over again with the BJP. And that's what we need to do. And incidentally, because we come from a certain frame of mind, we tend to, again that applies to me as well, we tend to focus too much on facts. Most of the battle is actually not about facts at all. The BJP voters know that Mr. Modi lies. I asked them, एक तो से मैंने पूछा, वो मेरे पास आए, वो आ जाते हैं कि सर आपको देखा है, वैसे आप बोलते बहुत अच्छा है, जिसका मतलब होता है कि है तो हूँ तो मैं बीजेपी वाला हूँ तो आपके खिलाफ, लेकिन आप हिंदी अच्छा बोलते हैं। तो बैठो बैठो क्या, ऐसे अच्छा मोदी जी पसंद है, हाँ मोदी है, साहब मोदी जी। तो वैसे एक बात बताओ, झूठ बोलते हैं क्या? हाँ सर, वो तो बोलते हैं। Now, it would look idiotic कि अगर कोई झूठ बोल रहा है, but I've asked all of you, do you have a friend who lies? And do you stay loyal to that friend? Yes, we do. We stay loyal to friends who lie because they are our friends. They are on our side. BJP's success in the game is to basically draw a line and say ये हमारे लोग हैं, ये दूसरे लोग हैं, हमारा आदमी है, झूठ बोल भी दिया कोई बात नहीं ना, चलता है ना। That's so the success is not in the factual game. The success is in drawing that emotional line. We and they. उसको हम कैसे क्रैक करें? और उसको क्रैक करने के तरीके फैक्ट्स नहीं है, स्टैटिस्टिक्स नहीं है। Humor is one of the most powerful weapons available against all dictatorships of the world. Humor, satire, that works much better than anything else. One final point, which is, I would again urge, yes, I know the difference between Congress and BJP and BJP and Samajwadi Party and BJP and TMC is overstated. Yes, I know that there are many things that they share. Yes, I know that many of them locally are quite authoritarian. Yes, I know they have participated in politics of communalism and so on and so forth. I completely agree. But the challenge of 24 is about making that what appears to be a fine distinction. देखिए बहुत टेलीस्कोपिक व्यू हम लें तो हम कहेंगे कि सारे आप सब लोगों की हाइट रफली एक ही जैसी है ना, आप सब 4.5 फुट से ऊपर हैं और 6.5 फुट से नीचे हैं, ब्रॉडली सब एक ही हुए ना। बट हम ऐसी जिंदगी नहीं जीते ना, हम उसके अंदर लंबों और छोटों को पहचानते हैं। पॉलिटिक्स उसी टोनैलिटीज में जी जाती है। इस वक्त जो चॉइस है, ये इतना टेलीस्कोपिक व्यू लेके हम ये ना कहें कि ये सब बराबर है, क्या फर्क पड़ता है। ये जिंदगी मौत का सवाल है, फर्क पड़ता है। और इस वक्त बीजेपी जो कर रही है, बाकी बिल्कुल कर्नाटका में क्या होगा, क्या कर्नाटका में कोई सच्चाई और ईमानदारी की सरकार आ जाएगी? आई एम नॉट अंडर ग्रेट इल्यूजन अबाउट ऑल दिस थिंग्स। लेकिन अगर ये लोग वापस आते और कहते हिजाब, ये तो उसके बाद इलेक्शन इस पे नहीं लड़ा गया, लेकिन उसके बाद की जो पॉलिटिक्स होती वो सब इन चीजों पे होती। So I would urge that something very serious is at stake right now. And let us not take that very abstract, somewhat theoretical view. There is a very serious distinction between the BJP RSS right now and everyone else with all their faults. हमारे दोस्त ने एक ने कहा था, वो अच्छा था मुहावरा, कई बार मुहावरों में बात आती है, हमारी थ्योरी में नहीं आती। उसने कहा जेब काटने वाले और गला काटने वाले में फर्क होता है ना, वही फर्क है। Something very big is at stake, and I would again urge you, invite you, and request you to please join in whichever way you can this great battle that lies ahead in the next 11 months. जीते या हारे, कम से कम इतना तो कह सकें कि मैं लड़ा था, इतना तो करना चाहिए। थैंक यू।
Okay, so on the behalf of entire CPS and entire JNU, we would like to extend our heartiest gratitude to all the speakers, basically our alumni, and also we would like to thank our entire CPS team for making this event a huge success. From all the way to making posters, to sticking them out, to circulating it. Thank you guys. Also to each one of us present here for enthusiastically participating in this event, engaging with our speakers. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, professors.